poor girl finds a billionaire locked in a trunk. His reaction to her face turns her life upside down. She was just trying to survive another day in the junkyard when she opened a car trunk and found a billionaire who looked at her face like he'd seen a ghost, because she was identical to the daughter he'd lost forever. Before we continue this wonderful story, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. Now let's get to where the story began. The morning sun turned Fletcher's junkyard into a maze of twisted metal and broken dreams, casting long shadows between towers of crushed cars that reached toward the California sky like mechanical mountains. 8-year-old Mia Kowalski moved through this landscape with the silent efficiency of someone who'd learned that survival depended on being invisible, her small frame weaving between rusted hulks and piles of scrap metal that most adults would find treacherous to navigate. She'd been living in the junkyard for 6 months now, ever since she'd run away from the Hendersons' foster home in Riverside. The Hendersons had seemed nice enough during the social worker visits, but behind closed doors, Mr. Henderson had hands that wandered and a temper that exploded without warning. Mia had learned early in her 8 years of life that adults who promised safety usually delivered the opposite. So when the bruises on her arm had started showing at school, she'd made a choice that most kids her age couldn't even imagine. She'd disappeared. Fletcher's junkyard wasn't supposed to be inhabited by anything other than rats and the occasional stray cat. But Mia had discovered that the old man who owned it only came by twice a week, and the fence had holes that were exactly the right size for a small, determined girl who knew how to squeeze through spaces that seemed impossible. She'd made a home of sorts in an abandoned school bus that sat at the far edge of the property, its yellow paint faded to the color of old mustard, its interior transformed into a survival shelter that would have impressed a military survival instructor. This morning, like every morning, Mia was hunting for breakfast. The convenience store 3 miles away sometimes threw out food that was technically expired, but still perfectly edible. And if she timed her scavenging right, she could grab a meal without anyone noticing the dirty kid with the too big clothes and the wary eyes. But first, she needed to check her traps. She'd learned to catch rainwater in containers she'd salvaged from the junk piles, to identify which cars might still have useful items in their glove compartments, to tell the difference between metal that was worth trading and metal that was just garbage. The junkyard had become her kingdom, a place where her small size was an advantage rather than a vulnerability, where her ability to move silently and think strategically meant the difference between eating and going hungry. Okay, breakfast first, then check the perimeter, she whispered to herself, a habit she'd developed to combat the loneliness that sometimes felt heavier than hunger. Mr. Fletcher won't be here until Thursday, so we're good for 3 more days. She was making her way toward the fence line when she heard something that made her freeze. A car engine, getting closer. Mia dropped to her belly behind a stack of tires, her heart racing with the familiar panic of potential discovery. She'd been caught once before by teenagers looking for a place to party, and the encounter had taught her that even people who weren't specifically looking for trouble could become dangerous when they found a child living alone. The engine sound grew louder, then stopped somewhere near the main gate. Mia waited, counting her heartbeats, straining to hear voices over the sound of morning wind whistling through broken windshields and rusted exhaust pipes. "This is perfect," a male voice said, too far away for her to make out clearly. "Nobody comes out here. We can take our time. Just get it done," another voice replied, this one sharper, more impatient. "I want to be back in LA by noon." Mia's survival instincts kicked into high gear. Strangers in the junkyard meant danger, especially strangers who talked about getting things done, in voices that carried undertones of violence. She began moving through the maze of scrap metal, staying low, using the cover she'd learned to navigate during 6 months of avoiding detection. As she got closer to the voices, she could make out more of their conversation. "He's starting to come around," the first voice said. "We need to hurry." "Should have used more of the stuff," the second voice complained. "Rich boys got better tolerance than I expected." Shut up and help me get him out of the trunk. The sooner we finish this, the sooner we can disappear. Trunk. They had someone in a car trunk. Mia's mind raced through possibilities. Kidnapping, murder, things she'd seen on TV during her brief stays in foster homes, where the adults forgot to monitor what she watched. Her instinct was to run, to get as far away as possible from whatever was happening near the front of the junkyard. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of being trapped and helpless herself. Or maybe it was the simple human decency that 6 months of living like a feral animal hadn't quite managed to erase. Whatever it was, instead of running away, Mia found herself moving closer to the sounds of activity. She reached a vantage point behind a tower of crushed cars and carefully peered around the edge of twisted metal. 2 men in their 30s were standing beside a black sedan, both wearing jeans and t-shirts that tried to look casual, but somehow seemed like costumes. One was tall and thin with nervous energy that kept his hands constantly moving, while the other was shorter and broader, with the kind of stillness that suggested he was comfortable with violence. "Come on, Sleeping Beauty," the tall one was saying as they opened the trunk. "Time to wake up." They reached into the trunk and pulled out a man who was clearly unconscious, his hands bound behind his back, his mouth covered with duct tape. Even from her hidden position, Mia could see that this wasn't a street crime gone wrong. The unconscious man was wearing an expensive suit, his shoes were leather, and everything about him suggested money and importance. "He's heavier than he looks," the shorter man complained as they dragged their victim toward a clear area where old washing machines sat in rusted rows like tombstones. "Rich food," the tall one replied. "Corporate lunches and golf club dinners. We're doing him a favor, really. Helping him lose weight permanently." They laughed at this, the kind of ugly laughter that made Mia's skin crawl. She'd heard similar sounds from adults who found pleasure in hurting things smaller than themselves, and she recognized the tone of people who'd already decided that someone else's life didn't matter. The men propped their victim against a washing machine and began discussing logistics. How to stage the scene, where to put the body, how to make it look like an accident. Mia listened with growing horror as they casually planned murder like they were discussing dinner reservations. But then something unexpected happened. The victim's eyes opened. 72 hours earlier, Ryan Blackwell had been sitting in the 34th floor conference room of Blackwell Technologies, listening to quarterly projections and trying to maintain the focused attention that running a billion-dollar company required. At 36, he'd built his tech empire from a garage startup into one of California's most successful software companies. But success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. The meeting was standard corporate procedure. Department heads presenting numbers, executives debating strategy, the endless grind of decisions that kept thousands of employees working and millions of customers connected. Ryan participated with the professional competence that had made him legendary in Silicon Valley, but part of his mind was elsewhere, remembering the same date 3 years earlier when his world had shattered completely. Emma would have been 11 today. His daughter's birthday had become an annual exercise in survival, a day when grief hit him like a physical force that made breathing difficult and thinking clearly nearly impossible. The rational part of his mind understood that her death hadn't been his fault. Drunk drivers were responsible for their own choices, and accidents happened regardless of guilt or innocence. But the father part of his mind, the part that had loved her more than life itself, knew better. If he'd left work early to pick her up from school instead of staying late for a client call, Emma would still be alive. If he'd been the kind of father who prioritized daughter over deadlines, she never would have been walking home alone when Marcus Rodriguez decided to drive after drinking his lunch. If he'd been better at balancing work and family, his little girl would still be filling his house with laughter and chaos, and the kind of joy that made everything else feel insignificant. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises to follow up on action items, but Ryan barely heard the professional pleasantries. He was thinking about Emma's laugh, about the way she used to steal his coffee, even though it was too bitter for her taste, about the bedtime stories they'd never finish, and the soccer games he'd never attend. Ryan. His assistant, Janet, appeared in the doorway with the concerned expression she'd worn more frequently during the past 3 years. "Your 4 o'clock cancelled. Would you like me to reschedule, or—" "I'm going home," he said, loosening his tie with hands that felt disconnected from his body. "If anything urgent comes up, handle it yourself, or tell them it can wait until tomorrow." "Of course. Do you need—" "I'm fine, Janet. Just tired." She nodded with the understanding of someone who'd worked for him long enough to recognize the signs of his annual emotional collapse. Emma's birthday, the anniversary of the accident, Father's Day. Janet had learned to clear his schedule around the dates that turned her normally unflappable boss into someone who looked like he was drowning in plain sight. Ryan left the building through the parking garage, grateful to avoid the lobby where employees might feel obligated to make small talk or ask about his weekend plans. His car, a Tesla Model S that Emma had picked out because she liked the way it drove itself, sat in his reserved spot like a monument to success that felt increasingly meaningless. He was halfway to his Malibu house when he noticed the car following him. At first, he dismissed it as paranoia brought on by emotional exhaustion. But after 3 lane changes and 2 unnecessary turns, the black sedan was still maintaining a careful distance behind him. Ryan's mind shifted into the analytical mode that had made him successful in business, calculating options, assessing threats, developing contingency plans. Corporate kidnapping wasn't unheard of in his circle. Tech CEOs made attractive targets for people who wanted money, revenge, or leverage against major companies. Ryan had received death threats before, angry emails from laid-off employees, and the occasional demand for ransom money from people who'd apparently watched too many movies about wealthy executives. He reached for his phone to call 911, but before he could dial, his driver's side window exploded in a shower of safety glass. Something struck him in the neck. A tranquilizer dart, his mind registered with detached amazement, and the world began to tilt sideways. The last thing Ryan remembered before unconsciousness claimed him was the bitter irony that he was being kidnapped on Emma's birthday, that he might die on the same date she had, that perhaps this was the universe's way of reuniting a father with the daughter he'd failed to protect. Now, consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark pool. Ryan's head felt like it was stuffed with cotton, his mouth tasted like chemicals, and his hands were bound behind his back with rope that bit into his wrists. The duct tape over his mouth made breathing difficult, and every muscle in his body ached from being cramped in what he now realized had been a car trunk. "Look who's decided to join the party," one of his kidnappers said, noticing his open eyes. "Good timing, Mr. Blackwell. We were just discussing your retirement plans." Ryan tried to focus on their faces, to memorize details that might help police identify them later. But the drugs in his system made everything fuzzy around the edges, and the growing certainty that there wouldn't be a later made surveillance seem pointless. "Nothing personal," the taller kidnapper continued, pulling out a gun that looked enormous in the morning sunlight. "Well, actually, it is personal. You laid off my brother-in-law last month. Good worker, 20 years with the company, but apparently not profitable enough for your quarterly projections. And my cousin," the shorter one added. "And my neighbor. Your restructuring destroyed a lot of families, Mr. Blackwell. We figured it was time for you to understand what loss feels like." Ryan wanted to explain that layoffs were never personal, that business decisions were based on market forces and financial necessity, that he'd tried to minimize job losses while keeping the company viable. But the duct tape made speech impossible, and he suspected his kidnappers weren't interested in hearing corporate justifications for their personal tragedies. "Should we make him kneel, or just do it execution style?" the tall one asked with the casual tone of someone discussing lunch options. "Just get it over with," his partner replied. "The longer we stay here, the more chance someone sees us." Ryan closed his eyes and thought about Emma. If he was about to die, at least he'd be with her again. At least the guilt and grief that had consumed him for 3 years would finally end. At least. A small sound made him open his eyes. Not quite a footstep, not quite a voice, but something that suggested they weren't alone in the junkyard. His kidnappers heard it too, both men turning toward the maze of scrap metal that surrounded them. "What was that?" the shorter one asked, his gun now pointed toward the sound instead of at Ryan. "Probably a cat," the tall one replied, but his voice carried uncertainty. "This place is full of strays." They waited, listening, and Ryan found himself hoping desperately that whatever had made the sound would stay hidden. Whether it was an animal, a homeless person, or just settling metal, he didn't want anyone else caught in his kidnapper's violent plans. But then, from behind a stack of old tires, a small face peered out. A child's face, framed by dirty blonde hair and marked by eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. Ryan's world stopped. The face was impossible, but undeniably real. It was Emma's face, Emma's eyes, Emma's expression of cautious curiosity that she'd worn whenever she'd discovered something interesting and potentially dangerous. It was his dead daughter looking at him from a junkyard 60 miles from where she'd been buried 3 years ago. The drugs in his system must be causing hallucinations, Ryan thought desperately. Grief and chemicals were creating visions of the child he'd lost, making him see Emma in the features of a stranger. It had to be a hallucination, because the alternative, that Emma was somehow alive, somehow here, was too impossible to believe and too wonderful to survive if it turned out to be false. But hallucination or not, the child was in danger. Ryan's kidnappers had seen her too, and their expressions of surprise were rapidly shifting towards something more predatory. "Well, well," the tall one said, smiling in a way that made Ryan's blood run cold. "Looks like we have a witness." The child's face, Emma's face, impossible and heartbreaking and absolutely real, stared at Ryan from behind the stack of tires with eyes that held the same intelligent wariness his daughter had possessed. But this wasn't Emma. This was a stranger who happened to carry his dead child's features like a cruel gift from a universe that specialized in devastating irony. "Kid," the tall kidnapper called out, his voice switching to the false friendliness that predators used when they wanted to lure prey closer. "Come on out, sweetheart. We're not going to hurt you." The child's eyes, Emma's eyes, flicked between the kidnappers and Ryan, calculating danger with the speed of someone who'd learned to assess threats as a matter of survival. Ryan could see intelligence working behind those familiar features, could see the exact same expression Emma used to wear when she was trying to solve a problem that adults thought was too complex for an 8-year-old mind. "It's okay, honey," the shorter kidnapper added, moving slowly toward the tire stack with his gun held low but ready. "We just want to talk to you." But the child wasn't stupid. Ryan watched as she took in the bound man, the weapons, the isolation of the location, and made the kind of rapid risk assessment that most kids her age couldn't even imagine. Instead of approaching the friendly voices, she disappeared back behind the tires with the fluid grace of someone who'd learned that staying hidden meant staying alive. "Shit," the tall kidnapper muttered, abandoning the pretense of friendliness. "Kid's smart. Too smart. Can't leave her," his partner replied with the flat certainty of someone discussing an unfortunate necessity. "She's seen our faces, seen him. We finish the job, then we deal with the witness." The casual way they discussed killing a child sent rage through Ryan's system that burned away the lingering effects of the tranquilizer. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just about corporate revenge or personal vendettas. This was about a little girl who looked exactly like Emma and was about to die because she'd been unlucky enough to witness his execution. Ryan began working frantically at the ropes binding his wrists, ignoring the way the coarse fibers cut into his skin. He had to get free. He had to protect this child who wore his daughter's face like a message from whatever forces govern second chances and impossible redemptions. "You check that side," the tall kidnapper directed, gesturing toward the left side of the tire stack. "I'll go right. She's got to come out eventually." But the child, this Emma who wasn't Emma, proved more resourceful than 2 grown men with guns anticipated. While they moved to flank her position, she was already gone, having apparently slipped away through passages in the junk maze that only someone small and desperate would know existed. "Where the hell did she go?" the shorter kidnapper demanded, his professional calm beginning to crack. "She's here somewhere," his partner replied, but his voice carried frustration. "Kid knows this place. probably lives here. Lives here. The words hit Ryan like a physical blow. A child who looked like Emma was living alone in a junkyard, surviving on her own in conditions that would challenge an adult. The similarity in their faces suddenly seemed less important than the reality of her circumstances. This little girl was abandoned, desperate, and now in mortal danger because of his situation. "We don't have time for hide and seek," the tall kidnapper said, checking his watch. "Police could show up, or the old man who owns this place. We need to finish this and get out. So what do you want to do? Leave a witness?" "No, but we can't spend all day hunting down one kid." They were debating strategy when a small voice called out from somewhere in the metal maze. "Hey, mister with the rope." Both kidnappers spun toward the sound, but Ryan's heart stopped completely. The voice was Emma's voice. The same pitch, the same cadence, the same slight rasp that had made her sound older than her years. It was impossible, but undeniable. "Yeah, you with the tape on your mouth." The voice continued from a different location, the child having moved while speaking. "Can you hear me?" Ryan nodded frantically, hoping she could see him from wherever she was hidden. "Good. When I say run, you run toward the big crane on the left. There's a place to hide there. Can you do that?" The kidnappers were moving toward the new voice location, but the child was already gone again, her words echoing from the metal surfaces in ways that made pinpointing her position impossible. "Kids playing games," the shorter kidnapper snarled. "This is ridiculous." "She's trying to help him," his partner realized. "Little bitch thinks she's some kind of hero." The casual cruelty in their voices when talking about a child made Ryan's vision go red around the edges. He worked harder at the ropes, feeling them give slightly as his wrists became slick with blood from the abrasions. "Listen to me, kid," the tall kidnapper called out, his voice echoing off the metal surfaces. "This man is a bad person. He's hurt a lot of families, taken away people's jobs, made children go hungry. We're trying to stop him from hurting more people." "That's a lie," the child's voice responded from yet another location. "Bad people don't cry when they think about somebody they miss." The observation hit Ryan like lightning. She'd been watching him, had seen his emotional reaction to her face, had somehow understood that his tears were about loss rather than fear. This 8-year-old stranger had read his grief with the accuracy of a trained psychologist. "You don't understand what you're seeing," the shorter kidnapper tried, his voice taking on the patronizing tone adults used when they thought children were too naive to grasp adult complexities. "I understand that you have guns and he doesn't," the child replied. "I understand that 2 against 1 isn't fair. I understand that people who hurt kids usually start by hurting other people first." The mature way she spoke, the clear logic of her assessment, the fearless way she was standing up to armed men. It was exactly what Emma would have done. Ryan's daughter had never backed down from bullies, had never accepted adult explanations that didn't make sense, had never hesitated to defend someone she thought was being treated unfairly. "Now!" the child shouted. Ryan didn't hesitate. Despite his bound hands and drugged coordination, he launched himself toward the crane she'd indicated, running with the desperate energy of someone who'd been given a second chance at protecting a child who mattered more than his own life. Behind him, he heard the kidnappers cursing and giving chase, their heavier footsteps echoing off the metal surfaces. But the child had chosen her moment well. Ryan reached the crane's base just as she appeared from another direction, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who knew every inch of the junkyard's layout. "This way," she whispered, grabbing his bound hands and leading him toward what looked like a solid wall of crushed cars, but turned out to be a narrow passage that only someone her size should have been able to navigate. Somehow, she guided him through the maze of twisted metal, her small hands providing direction and reassurance as they moved deeper into the junkyard's interior. Behind them, the kidnappers' voices grew more distant and frustrated as they lost the trail in the labyrinth of scrap and shadow. Finally, she pulled him into a space that was barely large enough for both of them. A cavity formed by the way several old cars had been stacked, creating a hidden room that was invisible from the outside. In the dim light that filtered through gaps in the metal, Ryan could finally see her clearly. It was Emma's face. Not similar, not reminiscent, identical. The same green eyes, the same small nose, the same determined chin. The same expression of serious concentration she wore when she was trying to solve a problem that mattered to her. "Oh God," Ryan whispered, the words coming out as a broken sob around the duct tape still covering his mouth. "Oh Emma, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." The child froze, staring at him with sudden wariness. "My name's not Emma," she said carefully. "My name's Mia." But Ryan was lost in a grief storm that had been building for 3 years, triggered by seeing his daughter's face in impossible circumstances. The rational part of his mind knew this was a stranger, knew that Emma was dead and buried and gone forever. But the father part of his mind, the part that had never stopped looking for her in crowds and dreaming about her return, couldn't process the distinction between resemblance and resurrection. "I should have picked you up from school," he continued, tears streaming down his face. "I should have been there. I should have protected you." "Mister," the child Mia said, her voice sharp with alarm. "Mister, you're scaring me. I don't know what you're talking about." Her fear cut through Ryan's breakdown like cold water. This wasn't Emma. This was a living child who'd just risked her life to save a stranger, who was now trapped in a small space with a man who was having what probably looked like a complete psychotic break. "I'm sorry," he managed around the tape, forcing himself to focus on reality instead of fantasy. "I'm sorry. You look like someone I lost." "Your daughter?" Mia asked, her intelligence once again cutting straight to the heart of complex adult emotions. Ryan nodded, not trusting his voice. "She's dead." Another nod. "And I look like her?" A whisper of confirmation that came out as barely audible sound. Mia studied his face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that would determine her safety. "That's why you were crying when you saw me. Not because you were scared of those men, but because I reminded you of her." "Yes. And that's why you said her name instead of asking mine." "Yes." Mia was quiet for a long moment, processing information with the careful consideration of someone who'd learned that understanding adult motivations was often a matter of survival. "What was her name?" she asked finally. "Emma." "How old was she?" 8. "She was 8 when she died." "Like me." "Like you." Another silence, this one loaded with implications neither of them was ready to examine. "Mister," Mia said eventually, "I need to get that tape off your mouth and untie your hands. But I need you to promise me something first." "What?" "Promise me you're not going to try to pretend I'm her. Promise me you know I'm not your daughter, even though I look like her." The request was so mature, so psychologically sophisticated, that Ryan felt his heart break all over again. This 8-year-old had identified the exact danger of their situation, that his grief might make him treat her as a replacement rather than as herself. "I promise," he said, meaning it despite the way his heart clenched at the thought of acknowledging that this wasn't Emma returned to him by some miracle of resurrection. "Okay," Mia said, reaching for the duct tape. "Hold still. This is going to hurt." She was right. Removing the tape felt like it took half his skin with it. But the ability to breathe normally again, to speak clearly, was worth the pain. "Thank you," Ryan said as she worked at the ropes binding his wrists. "What you did back there, distracting them so I could escape, that was incredibly brave." "That was incredibly stupid," Mia corrected, her small fingers working at knots that had been designed to be permanent. "But those men were going to kill you, and I don't like bullies. You could have been hurt. You could have been killed. I could get killed crossing the street. I could get killed going to sleep tonight. At least this way, someone else gets to not die too." The casual way she discussed mortality, the matter-of-fact acceptance of danger as a normal part of life, told Ryan more about her circumstances than any direct explanation could have. This child lived with the constant awareness that survival wasn't guaranteed, that tomorrow wasn't promised, that safety was a luxury she couldn't afford to assume. "Mia," he said as the ropes finally came free and feeling returned to his hands. "How long have you been living here?" 6 months and 4 days, she replied with the precision of someone who counted survival in daily increments. "Where are your parents?" "Don't have any. Never did." Foster family? Group home. Ran away from the last one. Won't go back. Why? Mia's expression closed down, her features shifting from open helpfulness to defensive wariness. Because grown-ups who say they want to help usually want something else. Because the system doesn't actually protect kids. It just moves them around until they age out or disappear. Mia. And because, she continued with the bitter wisdom of someone who'd learned hard truths too young, I'm safer taking care of myself than trusting adults to take care of me. Ryan looked at this child who wore his daughter's face and carried wounds that no 8-year-old should have to bear, and felt something shift in his chest. The grief that had consumed him for 3 years was still there, but it was being joined by something else. A protective instinct that had nothing to do with Emma's memory and everything to do with Mia's immediate needs. Those men, he said. They're not going to give up. They're going to keep looking for both of us. I know, Mia replied calmly. That's why we need to stay hidden until they leave. And then what? Then you go back to your life, and I go back to mine. Mia, I can't just leave you here. You're 8 years old, living alone in a junkyard. I've been doing fine on my own, she interrupted, her voice carrying the fierce independence of someone who'd learned that self-reliance was the only reliable protection. You've been surviving. That's not the same as being fine. It's better than being hurt by people who are supposed to take care of me. The pain in her voice, the absolute certainty that adults represented danger rather than safety, made Ryan's chest ache with recognition. Emma had trusted completely. Trusted him. Trusted the world. Trusted that the people who loved her would keep her safe. That trust had been broken by a drunk driver and Ryan's failure to be there when she needed him most. But Mia had learned the opposite lesson. Mia had learned that trust was dangerous, that independence was survival, that counting on adults led to disappointment and pain. Mia, Ryan said carefully, what if I told you that some adults can be trusted? What if I told you that some promises actually get kept? I'd say you haven't met the right kind of adults yet, she replied with the cynicism of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to believe in exceptions. What if I want to prove you wrong? Then you'd be wasting your time. Maybe. But maybe proving you wrong would be worth the effort. Mia stared at him for a long moment, her green eyes, Emma's eyes, searching his face for signs of deception or manipulation. Why? She asked finally. Why would you care what happens to me? You don't even know me. It was a fair question, and one that Ryan wasn't sure he could answer honestly without revealing how much her resemblance to Emma affected his judgment. But as he looked at this brave, wounded, impossibly resilient child, he realized that his protective feelings weren't just about her appearance. They were about her courage, her intelligence, her willingness to risk herself for a stranger. They were about the person she was, not just the face she wore. Because, he said finally, you saved my life. Because you're 8 years old, and you deserve better than living in a junkyard. Because someone should care what happens to you, and right now, I'm the only someone available. That's not good enough, Mia said with the blunt honesty that seemed to be her default mode. Adults always have reasons for wanting to help. Usually the reasons are about them, not about the kid they're supposedly helping. You're right, Ryan admitted. My reasons are partly about me. Looking at you reminds me of my daughter, and that makes me want to protect you the way I couldn't protect her. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve protection for your own sake. What's the difference? The difference is that I'm not trying to save you to fix my guilt about Emma. I'm trying to save you because you're worth saving, regardless of who you remind me of. Mia considered this with the serious attention she seemed to give all important information. And if I said no? If I said I don't want your help? Then I'd respect that choice. But I'd also ask you to think about whether staying here alone is really what you want, or just what feels safest, because it's what you know. Before Mia could respond, voices echoed from somewhere in the junkyard. The kidnappers, still searching, still dangerous. Both Ryan and Mia went completely still, listening to threats and curses that were getting closer to their hiding place. We need to get out of here, Mia whispered. I know another way, but we have to move now. As she led him deeper into the maze of metal and shadow, Ryan realized that their roles had reversed. He'd come to this junkyard as a victim, and she'd come to his rescue. But now, as they fled together through a landscape that was her domain, he was beginning to understand that saving each other might be more complicated than either of them had anticipated. The child who wore Emma's face was nothing like the daughter he'd lost. She was harder, more suspicious, more damaged by life's cruelties. But she was also braver than anyone her age should have to be, smarter than most adults he knew, and more deserving of love and protection than she could possibly understand. Whether she wanted his help or not, Ryan was already committed to making sure that Mia's story didn't end in a junkyard. He just had to figure out how to convince her that trusting him wouldn't be the biggest mistake of her young life. The journey through the junkyard's hidden passages felt like navigating an underground city that existed parallel to the world above. Mia moved with the confident efficiency of someone who'd mapped every safe route and memorized every potential hiding place, while Ryan struggled to keep up with coordination still affected by whatever drug his kidnappers had used. "Stay low here," Mia whispered as they crawled through a space between two crushed buses. "The metal creaks if you put weight on the wrong spots." Ryan followed her instructions, marveling at the survival skills this 8-year-old had developed during 6 months of living like a refugee in her own country. Every movement she made was calculated for silence. Every path she chose was designed for concealment. Every decision balanced safety against speed with the precision of someone who'd learned that mistakes were measured in bruises or worse. "How much farther?" he asked as they paused to listen for sounds of pursuit. "Almost there. My place is in the back corner, where the old buses are parked. Nobody goes there because the ground's soft and the big trucks can't get through." Her place. The casual way she referred to a shelter in a junkyard as her place broke Ryan's heart in ways he couldn't quite articulate. This child had created a home from abandoned materials in an abandoned space, had built safety from scraps and determination because the adult world had failed to provide either. "Mia," he said as they resumed moving, "when we get somewhere safe, we need to talk about what happens next." "Nothing happens next," she replied without looking back. "You leave, I stay. Everyone goes back to their normal life. This isn't normal. Living in a junkyard isn't normal for an 8-year-old. Normal is getting hit by foster fathers who drink too much. Normal is getting moved to new families every few months because nobody actually wants damaged kids. Normal is social workers who don't listen and teachers who don't care, and a system that treats children like inventory to be managed." The bitter accuracy of her assessment made Ryan realize that Mia's resistance to help wasn't just stubbornness. It was survival instinct based on repeated trauma. Every adult authority figure in her life had apparently failed her in fundamental ways, teaching her that independence was safer than trust, that solitude was preferable to the disappointment of broken promises. "Not all adults are like that," Ryan said, knowing even as he spoke that the words sounded hollow to someone who'd experienced the opposite. "Enough of them are," Mia replied, "and I can't tell the difference until it's too late." They reached her shelter as the morning sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows through the junkyard that provided additional cover for their movement. Ryan had expected something makeshift and temporary, a child's attempt at camping. What he found instead was a marvel of resourcefulness that would have impressed professional survival instructors. The old school bus sat at the far edge of the property, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation and carefully positioned scrap metal. From the outside, it looked like just another piece of abandoned junk. But Mia had transformed the interior into a functional living space that was both practical and oddly cozy. "This is incredible," Ryan said as she led him up the bus steps into her domain. The driver's seat had been removed to create more space, and the passenger area had been divided into zones. Sleeping area with salvaged cushions and blankets arranged into a proper bed, storage area with organized containers full of supplies, work area with tools and materials for repairs and modifications. Windows had been covered with materials that provided privacy while still allowing light, and the whole space was clean despite its unconventional location. "How did you do all this?" Ryan asked, genuinely amazed by the sophistication of her setup. "YouTube videos mostly," Mia replied with matter-of-fact pride. Library has free computer time, and I watched a lot of survival and building stuff before I had to leave. The library lets you use computers without adult supervision. Library lets anyone use computers if you know how to act like you belong there. The casual way she discussed circumventing systems designed to protect children revealed the depth of her self-reliance. Mia had learned to navigate adult institutions by being invisible, to access resources by being resourceful, to survive by being smarter than the people who were supposed to be taking care of her. Mia, this is impressive, but it's still not safe. You're living alone. You're not in school. You're not getting medical care. I'm alive, she interrupted with the finality of someone who'd learned to measure success in basic survival. I'm fed. I'm warm. I'm not getting hurt by people who are supposed to protect me. That's better than anything the system ever gave me. But you deserve more than just survival. You deserve education and stability, and I deserve to not get hurt, Mia said, her voice rising with frustration. I deserve to not get moved around like furniture every time adults decide I'm too much trouble. I deserve to not get hit when foster fathers are having bad days, or ignored when social workers have too many cases, or lied to when families decide they don't want me anymore. The pain in her voice was so raw that Ryan felt it like a physical wound. This child had been failed by every system designed to protect her, betrayed by every adult trusted with her care, and she'd responded by creating her own version of safety in the most unlikely place imaginable. What if, Ryan said carefully, there was a way to be safe without being alone? What if there was someone who could protect you without controlling you? There isn't, Mia replied with the absolute certainty of someone who'd tested this theory repeatedly. Adults always want something. Money from the state, good feelings about themselves, control over someone smaller than them. They never just want to help. What do you think I want? I think you want to feel better about losing your daughter by saving someone who looks like her. The brutal honesty of her assessment hit Ryan like a slap, partly because it contained enough truth to sting. His protective feelings for Mia were tangled up with his grief for Emma. His desire to help her was complicated by his need to assuage guilt about failing his own child. You're partly right, he admitted. Seeing you does make me think about Emma, and wanting to help you is connected to wishing I could have helped her. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve help for your own sake. Doesn't matter why you want to help, Mia said, settling onto her makeshift bed with the weariness of someone much older than 8. Matters what happens when the feeling wears off, or when helping gets inconvenient, or when you remember that I'm not actually your daughter. What if the feeling doesn't wear off? It always wears off. How do you know? Because I've been through 7 foster families, 3 group homes, and 2 relative placements. Everyone starts out wanting to help. Everyone ends up wanting me gone. The statistical recitation of abandonment was delivered with the emotional detachment of someone who'd learned to protect herself by not investing hope in adult promises. Ryan realized he was dealing with someone who'd been systematically taught that attachment led to pain, that trust resulted in betrayal, that the safest position was complete emotional independence. Mia, he said, settling carefully onto a crate that served as furniture, what would it take for you to believe that someone could be different? Nothing, she replied without hesitation. Because I can't afford to believe it and be wrong again. What if you could afford to be wrong? What if the cost of being wrong wasn't getting hurt? There's always a cost. Adults always find ways to make it your fault when they disappoint you. Ryan looked around the bus that this child had converted into a home through sheer determination and skill, and felt a mixture of admiration and heartbreak that was almost overwhelming. She'd created safety through complete self-reliance, had built security by eliminating the possibility of betrayal, had chosen isolation over the risk of repeated abandonment. You can't live like this forever, he said gently. Why not? I'm doing fine. You're 8 years old. What happens when you get sick? What happens when winter comes? What happens when you turn 18 and realize you've been alone for 10 years? I figure things out as they happen. Same as always. That's not living, Mia. That's just surviving. Surviving is enough. Is it? Is just making it through each day really all you want from life? For the first time since he'd met her, Mia hesitated before answering. The question had touched something beneath her defensive armor, some buried part of her that remembered wanting more than mere survival. Wanting more is dangerous, she said finally. Wanting more means caring about things you can't control. I can control whether I eat today, whether I stay warm tonight, whether I avoid getting caught by people who want to hurt me. I can't control whether adults keep their promises. So you've decided never to trust anyone? I've decided to trust myself. That's lonely. Lonely is safe. Lonely is also small. And you're not a small person, Mia. You're brave and smart and capable of incredible things. But you can't do incredible things if you never let anyone help you try. Mia stared at him with those green eyes that were so painfully familiar, and Ryan could see her internal struggle written across features that belonged to both herself and his lost daughter. She wanted to believe him. He could see it in the way her defensive posture softened slightly, in the way her voice lost some of its hard edge when she spoke again. "What would you want from me?" she asked. "If I said yes to whatever you're offering, what would you expect in return?" "I'd expect you to let me help you be safe. I'd expect you to go to school and see doctors when you need them, and have a real home instead of hiding in a junkyard. I'd expect you to be a kid instead of a survivor. And if I couldn't do those things, if I was too damaged or too difficult or too much trouble, then we'd figure out solutions together. But I wouldn't give up on you. Everyone gives up eventually. Not everyone. Not me." "You don't know me," Mia said, but her voice carried less conviction than before. "You don't know what I'm like when I'm not saving people from kidnappers. You don't know how hard it is to live with someone who's been through what I've been through." "You don't know me either," Ryan replied. "You don't know what I'm like when I'm not being rescued by 8-year-olds. You don't know whether I'm patient or kind or capable of keeping promises to people who matter to me. So we're both taking risks. We're both taking chances. What's the difference? Risks are about what you might lose. Chances are about what you might gain." Mia considered this distinction with the serious attention she gave all new concepts that might affect her survival calculus. What would I gain? Safety without isolation. Education without foster care bureaucracy. Someone who cares about you without wanting to control you. A family that chooses you instead of just tolerating you. And what would you gain? The question was clearly a test, designed to reveal his real motivations beneath whatever altruistic surface he presented. Ryan considered lying, offering the kind of selfless answer that adults were supposed to give when talking about helping children. But Mia's intelligence and experience with adult deception made honesty the only viable option. "I'd gain the chance to be the kind of father I couldn't be for Emma," he said. "I'd gain the opportunity to protect someone who matters to me. I'd gain a reason to care about the future instead of just surviving the past. So you do need something from me." "Yes, but what I need from you isn't something you'd have to sacrifice or perform or earn. I need you to let me care about you. I need you to be yourself, whatever that looks like, and trust that being yourself is enough. What if myself isn't very nice? What if I have nightmares and trust issues and weird habits from living alone? What if I'm not easy to love? Then we figure it out together. Love isn't about easy, Mia. Love is about commitment despite difficulty. You can't love someone you just met." "No, but I can choose to love someone I just met. I can decide that who you are matters enough to invest time and effort in discovering what love with you would look like." Mia was quiet for a long time, staring out the bus window at the junkyard that had been her kingdom and her prison for 6 months. Ryan could see her weighing possibilities, calculating risks, trying to imagine a future that included trust without betrayal, security without isolation. "Those men," she said eventually, "they're probably still looking for us. Probably. And even if they give up, you're probably in danger. People who kidnap CEOs don't usually just forget about it when things go wrong." Also probably true. "So even if I said yes to whatever this is, we'd have to deal with that first. We'd have to deal with it anyway. The question is whether we deal with it together or separately. Together is more complicated. Together is also more effective." Mia turned to look at him directly, and Ryan saw Emma's determined expression cross her features. The look his daughter used to get when she was about to make a decision that adults might not understand, but that she knew was right. If I said yes, Mia said carefully, if I said I wanted to try trusting you, what would happen next? Next we figure out how to get you somewhere safe, while I deal with the kidnapping situation. Then we start the process of making it legal for me to take care of you. Then we see what it's like to be a family. And if it doesn't work, if I'm too difficult, or you change your mind, or the family thing turns out to be harder than you expected, then we figure out what does work. But I don't give up, and I don't send you back to the system, and I don't abandon you just because things get complicated. You promise? I promise. Adults break promises. Some adults break promises. I keep mine. How do I know that? You don't. That's what makes it a chance instead of a guarantee. Mia stared at him for another long moment, then made a decision that Ryan could see cost her every ounce of courage she possessed. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll try trusting you. But I'm not calling you Dad, and I'm not pretending to be your dead daughter. And if you hurt me or lie to me or give up on me, I disappear and you never find me again. Understood, Ryan said, feeling something that might have been hope unfurl in his chest for the first time in 3 years. And Mia? Yeah. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove that some adults keep their promises. Before Mia could respond, the sound of engines approaching the junkyard made both of them freeze. The kidnappers were back, and this time they weren't alone. How many cars? Mia asked, her survival instincts immediately taking precedence over their emotional breakthrough. Ryan listened carefully to the engine sounds. At least 3. Maybe 4. They brought help. Looks like it. Which means this place isn't safe anymore. No, it's not. Mia was already moving, gathering essential supplies with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to pack for escape at a moment's notice. We need to leave. Now. Where can we go? I know a place. But we have to move fast, and you have to do exactly what I say. I'm in your hands. Good, Mia said, shouldering a backpack that contained everything she owned in the world. Because if we're going to be a family, you're going to have to learn to trust me too. As they prepared to flee deeper into the industrial wasteland that surrounded the junkyard, Ryan realized that their resistance to each other had been shattered by necessity and choice in equal measure. They were no longer a grieving father and a suspicious child. They were partners in survival, allies in building something neither of them quite knew how to name. Whether that something would survive contact with kidnappers, social services, legal complications, and the challenge of learning to love each other remained to be seen. But for the first time since Emma's death, Ryan was facing an uncertain future with hope instead of resignation. And for the first time in her 8 years of life, Mia was making choices based on possibility rather than just survival. The transformation might kill them both, but it might also save them. The sound of multiple vehicles converging on the junkyard sent Mia into full survival mode. She moved through her bus shelter with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd planned for this exact scenario, grabbing only the most essential items and abandoning everything else without a second thought. How did they find us so fast? Ryan asked, helping her gather supplies despite not knowing what was actually essential. Probably put a tracker on your car before they grabbed you, Mia replied, stuffing water bottles and energy bars into her backpack. Or they know this area better than I thought. Doesn't matter now, we have to move. Ryan watched her transform from the vulnerable child who'd just agreed to trust him into a tactical genius whose survival skills had been honed by 6 months of staying invisible in hostile territory. The speed of her mental shift was both impressive and heartbreaking. She could flip from emotional vulnerability to combat readiness in seconds, because her life had taught her that safety was always temporary. Where are we going? He asked as she led him toward the back of the bus. Emergency exit, Mia said, kicking out a panel that looked like solid wall, but had apparently been modified to serve as an escape route. There's a drainage tunnel under the fence that leads to the industrial district. They can't follow us with cars, and it'll take them time to figure out where we went. You've thought of everything. I've had to. They slipped through the false wall into a space that was barely wide enough for Ryan's shoulders, emerging behind the bus into an area that was invisible from the main junkyard. Mia had clearly chosen this location with multiple escape routes in mind, and she'd spent months preparing for the possibility of having to abandon everything at a moment's notice. "Stay low and follow exactly in my footsteps," she whispered as they began moving through tall weeds toward what looked like empty ground, but apparently concealed a drainage system. "The ground here is soft in some places, and will show tracks. Step where I step." Ryan followed her instructions, amazed by the level of tactical thinking she'd developed at an age when most children were worried about homework and friendships. Every movement she made was calculated for stealth. Every path she chose minimized their visibility from multiple angles. Every decision balanced speed against concealment with the expertise of a trained operative. The drainage tunnel was exactly as advertised, a concrete pipe barely large enough for an adult to crawl through, leading under the junkyard's fence toward the industrial area beyond. It was dark, cramped, and filled with standing water that soaked through their clothes within minutes. "How did you even find this?" Ryan asked as they crawled through the claustrophobic space. "Explored everything when I first got here," Mia replied, her voice echoing slightly off the concrete walls. "Always need to know your escape routes before you need them." "You were planning to leave from the first day?" "I was planning to survive from the first day. Sometimes surviving means staying. Sometimes it means leaving. You have to be ready for both." The tunnel seemed to go on forever, but finally they emerged into a drainage basin that put them on the far side of the industrial district, nearly a mile from the junkyard. Ryan's clothes were soaked and filthy, his hands were scraped from crawling over rough concrete, and his muscles ached from the awkward positioning required by their escape route. Mia, meanwhile, looked like this was just another day at the office. "How often have you had to do this?" Ryan asked as they caught their breath behind an abandoned warehouse. "Practice runs or real escapes?" "Either." "Both. Practice runs every week. Real escapes 3 times. Once when police came looking for runaways, once when some teenagers found my bus and wanted to party there, once when Mr. Fletcher brought potential buyers to look at the property." "You've been doing this for 6 months. I've been staying alive for 6 months. The distinction was important, Ryan realized. Mia didn't think of herself as living or thriving. She thought of herself as surviving, day by day, crisis by crisis, always one step ahead of the next threat to her safety or freedom. "Where do we go now?" he asked. "Depends on what you want to do about those men. You could call the police, report the kidnapping, let them handle it. But then you'd have to explain why you're with me, why I'm not in school or foster care, why a billionaire CEO is hiding in drainage tunnels with a runaway kid." Ryan hadn't considered the complications their partnership would create with law enforcement. A wealthy adult man traveling with an unaccompanied minor would raise immediate suspicions, especially when that minor was clearly living outside any official system of care. "What's the alternative?" "We handle it ourselves. Figure out who those men are, what they want, why they grabbed you in the first place. Then we make it not worth their while to keep looking for you. You're 8 years old. You shouldn't have to think about handling kidnappers. I'm 8 years old who's been handling dangerous adults for 6 months. Age doesn't change capability." She was right, Ryan realized. Mia's age was chronological, but her experience and competence were far beyond her years. She'd been forced to develop adult-level problem-solving skills because the adults in her life had failed to provide basic protection and stability. "How would we handle it ourselves?" he asked. "Information first. Who were they? Why did they target you specifically, whether they're working alone or part of something bigger? Then we decide whether to run, hide, or fight. And you know how to get that information? I know how to watch people without being seen. I know how to listen to conversations without being noticed. I know how to find things out that adults think kids can't understand." The matter-of-fact way she discussed surveillance and intelligence gathering reminded Ryan that Mia had been living in a world where information meant survival, where understanding threats was a daily necessity, where the skills of a spy were the basic requirements of staying alive. "Mia," he said carefully, "what you're describing sounds dangerous. Everything is dangerous. Question is whether we face the danger with information or without it. What if we just leave? Get in my car and drive somewhere they can't find us. They found your car once. They can find it again. Besides, running only works if you know what you're running from and where you're running to. Ryan looked at this 8-year-old who spoke like a military strategist and felt a complex mixture of admiration and sorrow. Her competence was undeniable, but it had been purchased at the cost of childhood innocence, safety, and the luxury of trusting adults to handle dangerous situations. Okay, he said. We get information first. But we do it safely, and if things get too dangerous, we call for help. Deal. But I decide what counts as too dangerous. Why you? Because I've been staying alive in dangerous situations longer than you have. It was an uncomfortable truth, but accurate. Ryan's life had been spent in boardrooms and conference calls, dealing with corporate threats that were resolved through lawyers and negotiations. Mia's life had been spent avoiding physical harm from people who had direct power over her, learning to navigate threats that could escalate to violence without warning. Where do we start? Ryan asked. We go back. Back to the junkyard? Close enough to watch. See who they are, how many of them, what they're doing. Information gathering starts with observation. That sounds incredibly risky. Everything we do from now on is going to be risky. Question is whether we take smart risks or stupid ones. They spent the next hour working their way back toward the junkyard through industrial areas that Mia knew like her own backyard. She led him through gaps in fences, around security cameras, past guard dogs that somehow didn't notice their passage. Her knowledge of the urban landscape was encyclopedic. She knew which businesses had night security, which lots were truly abandoned, which routes offered concealment during different times of day. How do you know all this? Ryan asked as they paused behind a shipping container that offered a clear view of the junkyard's entrance. You learn fast when getting caught means getting hurt, Mia replied, pulling a small pair of binoculars from her backpack. Where did you get binoculars? Borrowed them from a construction site. They were just sitting in a truck. You stole them. I borrowed them indefinitely without permission. Despite everything, Ryan found himself almost smiling at her creative definition of theft. Is there a difference? Stealing is when you take something someone needs. Borrowing indefinitely is when you take something someone forgot they had. I'm not sure that's a legal distinction. Legal and practical aren't the same thing. I need these more than whoever left them in an unlocked truck. The pragmatic way she approached questions of property and survival revealed another layer of the moral complexity she'd developed during 6 months of living outside conventional rules. Mia had learned to prioritize need over law, survival over social conventions, practical outcomes over abstract principles. What do you see? Ryan asked as she focused the binoculars on the junkyard. 5 men. 2 cars plus the original sedan. They're searching systematically, which means they know what they're doing. She paused, adjusting the focus. One of them is on the phone, probably calling for more help or reporting that you got away. Can you hear what they're saying? Too far. But body language says they're frustrated and maybe a little scared. Scared of what? Scared of whoever they work for. Scared of what happens when they have to explain that a billionaire CEO escaped with help from some kid they've never seen before. Ryan considered the implications. If his kidnappers were working for someone else, then simply escaping wouldn't end the threat. Whoever had ordered his abduction would still be out there, still motivated by whatever grievance had prompted the original plan. We need to know who's behind this, he said. We need to know a lot of things. But first we need to not get caught while we're figuring them out. How long can we stay hidden? Depends on how hard they look and how many resources they have. If it's just those 5 guys, we can stay ahead of them indefinitely. If they bring in professionals or police or people with real tracking equipment, we're in trouble. And if we get caught, you probably get killed. I probably disappear into a system that's already proved it can't protect kids from dangerous adults. The stark assessment sent a chill through Ryan that had nothing to do with their damp clothes or the October wind. Mia was facing the same life or death stakes that he was, but with the additional vulnerability of being a child in a world that was demonstrably unsafe for children without protection. "Mia," he said, "I won't let anything happen to you. You can't promise that. I can promise that I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. And if your power isn't enough, then we'll find more power. We'll get help, we'll call in favors, we'll use every resource I have access to. What if using those resources puts me back in the system?" It was the fear beneath all her other fears. Not just physical danger, but the loss of autonomy, the return to institutional care that had already failed her repeatedly. Mia was willing to face kidnappers and killers, rather than risk being returned to foster care, which said something devastating about her experiences with official protection. "Then we find a third option," Ryan said. "We find a way to keep you safe without putting you back in a system that's already hurt you. There might not be a third option. There's always a third option. Sometimes you have to create it yourself." That sounds like something rich people say when they don't understand how limited poor people's choices actually are. You're right. It does sound like that. But it's also true that having resources, money, connections, legal help, can create options that don't exist without them. "And you'd use those resources for me?" "I'd use everything I have to protect you." "Why?" "Because you saved my life. Because you deserve protection. Because caring about you gives my resources meaning they haven't had since Emma died." Mia lowered the binoculars and looked at him directly, her green eyes serious with the weight of decisions that no 8-year-old should have to make. "If we do this, if we stay together and try to handle this situation, you have to understand something," she said. "What?" "I don't know how to be a normal kid. I don't know how to trust adults completely. I don't know how to live in a house, or go to school, or do any of the things you probably think I should be doing. We'll figure it out together. And I have nightmares and trust issues, and I'm probably going to test every promise you make to see if you really mean it. I can handle nightmares and trust issues. And I'm not going to call you Dad just because you want to take care of me. I'm not going to pretend to be Emma just because I look like her. I don't want you to be anyone but yourself." "Good. Because myself is pretty complicated. Complicated is fine. Complicated is human." "Okay," Mia said, raising the binoculars again. "Then let's stay complicated together and see if we can figure out who wants you dead." As they settled into their surveillance position, Ryan realized that the forced proximity of their situation had accelerated their relationship in ways that might have taken months under normal circumstances. They'd gone from strangers to partners in survival, from potential helper and potential victim to a team with shared stakes and mutual dependence. Whether that acceleration would help them survive the next few days, or whether it would create complications they weren't prepared to handle, remained to be seen. But for the first time since Emma's death, Ryan was facing an uncertain future with someone who mattered to him, someone whose safety and happiness had become more important than his own comfort or security. And for the first time in her 8 years of life, Mia was making choices as part of a partnership rather than as a solitary survivor, trusting someone else's judgment and protection, even while maintaining her own capabilities and independence. They were still complicated, still damaged, still facing threats that could destroy everything they were trying to build together. But they were no longer alone, and sometimes not being alone was enough to make survival feel like the beginning of living, rather than just the postponement of dying. The kidnappers were still searching, still dangerous, still motivated by whatever had prompted the original abduction. But now they were hunting 2 people instead of 1, and one of those people was an 8-year-old who knew how to disappear in plain sight, and how to fight for things that mattered to her. It might not be enough, but it was more than either of them had faced the previous day, and sometimes more was all you needed to transform impossible odds into merely difficult ones. Their surveillance position behind the shipping container offered a clear view of the junkyard, while providing enough cover to remain undetected. But as the afternoon wore on, Ryan realized that watching his kidnappers search for them was only postponing the inevitable confrontation. They needed more than just information about the men's current activities. They needed to understand the motivation behind the original kidnapping. "They're not giving up," Mia observed, adjusting the binoculars to track the searchers' movement through the maze of scrap metal. "Been at it for 3 hours now. That's not normal for random criminals. What do you mean? Most bad guys, if their plan goes wrong, they cut their losses and disappear. These guys are acting like they can't afford to fail. Ryan considered her assessment, impressed again by her tactical thinking. So either they're being paid enough to make the risk worthwhile, or they're afraid of what happens if they don't succeed. Or both. Mia lowered the binoculars and looked at him seriously. What kind of enemies do you have? Business rivals, angry employees, people who might want you dead for personal reasons. The question forced Ryan to examine his life through the lens of potential threats, something he'd never had to consider before yesterday. His success in tech had been built on innovation and market strategy rather than the kind of cutthroat competition that might generate murderous enemies. There have been layoffs, he admitted. Companies I've acquired, redundancies when we consolidated operations, but nothing that seemed violent. Those men mentioned someone's brother-in-law getting fired. Said you destroyed families. Restructuring is part of business. It's not personal. It's personal to the families that lose their income. Mia's matter-of-fact observation carried no judgment, but it forced Ryan to confront the human cost of decisions he'd made in boardrooms, affecting people he'd never met. The abstract concept of workforce optimization became more concrete when viewed through the eyes of someone who understood what it meant to lose everything. "Tell me about Emma," Mia said suddenly, her voice gentle but direct. "Tell me what happened to her." The request caught Ryan off guard. They'd been focused on immediate survival, on tactical problems and strategic solutions. But Mia's question reminded him that their relationship was built on more than just mutual rescue. It was built on the devastating resemblance between her face and his daughter's, and on the grief that had shaped him for 3 years. "Why do you want to know?" "Because if I'm going to look like her for the rest of my life, I should understand who she was. Because you're going to compare me to her, whether you mean to or not. Because I need to know whether you can love me for myself, or if you're always going to see her when you look at me." The emotional intelligence behind her request was staggering. At 8 years old, Mia had identified the central psychological challenge of their relationship. Whether Ryan could separate his feelings for her from his grief for Emma, whether he could form genuine attachment to a living child, or would always be trying to resurrect a dead one. Emma was. Ryan paused, searching for words that would honor his daughter's memory without turning her into an impossible standard for comparison. Emma was curious about everything. She asked questions that most adults couldn't answer, like why people were sad and how to make sadness smaller. She sounds smart. She was brilliant, but not in a show-off way. She was brilliant in a way that made other people feel smarter when they talked to her. What did she like to do? Read. Build things with blocks or Legos or anything she could stack. Cook with me on weekends. She was getting really good at pancakes before. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Before the accident," Mia said gently. "Before the accident. Tell me about the accident." Ryan closed his eyes, letting the familiar weight of guilt and regret settle over him like a shroud. He'd told this story to therapists, to lawyers, to police officers, but never to a child who might understand both the loss and the self-blame that had consumed him since Emma's death. It was a Thursday in October. 3 years ago, almost to the day. I was supposed to pick Emma up from school, but I had a client call that ran late. Important deal, major contract, the kind of thing that affects the whole company. "So you stayed at work?" I stayed at work. Told myself it would just be another hour, that Emma could wait in the aftercare program until I finished. But the call went longer than expected, and by the time I got to the school, Emma had gotten tired of waiting. She walked home by herself. 8 years old, walking 6 blocks through a neighborhood I thought was safe, following a route we'd practiced together dozens of times. Mia was quiet, waiting for him to continue at his own pace. Marcus Rodriguez had been drinking at lunch. Construction worker, just gotten laid off, spending his unemployment money at a bar 3 blocks from Emma's school. He got in his truck and decided to drive home instead of calling someone for a ride. And he hit her. He hit her 4 blocks from our house. She was almost home. Almost safe. If I'd left work 10 minutes earlier, if I'd picked her up on time, if I'd been the kind of father who put his daughter before his deadlines, she'd still be alive. She'd still be alive. The simple acknowledgement of his guilt, spoken without judgment or attempts at comfort, was somehow more healing than 3 years of therapy had been. Mia understood loss in ways that most people couldn't. Understood that sometimes the worst pain came not from what happened, but from what didn't happen, from choices not made and protection not provided. What happened to the man who hit her? Vehicular manslaughter. He got 3 years in prison, served 18 months. He wrote me letters from jail, apologizing, saying he thought about Emma every day. He got out last year, moved to Arizona, started going to AA meetings. And you? And I built a company worth billions of dollars while my daughter stayed dead. I made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes while she stayed 8 years old forever. I won every business award anyone could win while she missed every birthday, every Christmas, every moment of growing up that I'd promised to share with her. That's not your fault, isn't it? If I'd prioritized being her father over being a CEO, then maybe she'd be alive, or maybe something else would have happened on a different day. You can't control drunk drivers, Ryan. You can only control your own choices. The use of his name, spoken with the same gentle authority she'd used to guide him through the junkyard, made Ryan look at her more closely. How do you know that? Because I've spent a lot of time thinking about things that were supposed to be my fault, but weren't really. Like my mom leaving when I was a baby. Was that because I cried too much? Like my dad never being around. Was that because I wasn't good enough to stay for? Like foster families giving up on me. Was that because I was too difficult to love? Those things weren't your fault. I know that now. But I had to learn it. Had to figure out the difference between things I could control and things that just happened to me. Ryan felt something shift in his understanding of this remarkable child. She wasn't just wise beyond her years. She was wise because of her years, because she'd been forced to develop emotional intelligence and psychological insight as survival skills. What happened to your parents, Mia? Really happened. Mom was 17 when I was born. Drug problem, no family support. Father of her baby disappeared the day she told him she was pregnant. She tried for about 6 months, then dropped me at a fire station with a note saying she hoped someone could give me a better life than she could. And your father? Never met him. Mom's note didn't even include his name. Just said he was young and scared and not ready to be a dad. I'm sorry. Don't be. Not having parents who don't want you is better than having parents who don't want you but stick around anyway. The pragmatic way she discussed abandonment revealed another layer of the psychological armor she'd developed. Mia had learned to frame her losses in ways that protected her from self-blame, to find advantages in disadvantages, to transform rejection into liberation. What about foster care? What happened there? Mia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the careful control of someone discussing trauma that was still too fresh for casual conversation. First family was okay. Just temporary placement while they looked for something permanent. Nice people, but they had 3 kids of their own, and I was just extra income from the state. That doesn't sound terrible. It wasn't. But it wasn't family either. I was a house guest who did chores and tried not to be too much trouble. What about the others? Second family wanted a daughter, but kept trying to make me into someone I wasn't. Different clothes, different hobbies, different personality. When I couldn't be the kid they wanted, they said I was adjustment challenged and requested a transfer. And then the Hendersons. He worked construction, she stayed home. They seemed normal during the interviews. But behind closed doors, Mia trailed off, her hands unconsciously moving to her arms where Ryan could see faint marks that might have been old bruises. He hurt you. He hurt everyone when he drank. Wife, kids, me. But I was the easiest target because I didn't have anywhere else to go. You reported it? Tried to. But I was the new kid with a history of adjustment problems, and he was a respected member of the community. Caseworkers said I was having trouble adapting to family structure, that I needed to try harder to fit in. So you ran. So I ran. Because staying meant accepting that getting hurt was normal, that adults could do whatever they wanted to kids, that my job was to endure instead of to be safe. The systematic failure of every adult institution designed to protect her had taught Mia that self-advocacy was the only reliable protection, that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, that survival required complete self-reliance. "That's why you don't trust promises," Ryan said. "That's why I don't trust adults who make promises without understanding what keeping them actually costs." "What does keeping promises to you actually cost?" "Patience when I have nightmares. Understanding when I test boundaries to see if you really mean what you say. Acceptance that I might never be the kind of normal kid you think you want. Commitment that lasts longer than the honeymoon period when helping me stops being easy." The honesty of her self-assessment was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Mia understood her own damage, could articulate her needs and fears, could communicate what kind of support might actually help her heal. She wasn't asking for perfection. She was asking for consistency, understanding, and the kind of long-term commitment that could survive the inevitable difficulties of trauma recovery. "I can do patient," Ryan said. "I can do understanding. I can do committed for as long as you need. Even when I wake up screaming from nightmares about foster fathers who drink too much. Even then. Even when I hoard food because I'm afraid there won't be enough tomorrow. Even then. Even when I push you away to test whether you'll give up on me like everyone else has. Especially then. Why? What makes you think you can handle things that other adults couldn't? Because I understand what it feels like to lose someone who matters to you. Because I know what it's like to blame yourself for things you couldn't control. Because I've learned that love isn't about easy. It's about showing up even when showing up is hard. And if loving me doesn't fix your grief about Emma, then I'll love you anyway. And I'll keep grieving Emma anyway. And maybe both of those things can be true at the same time. You think you can love us both? The daughter you lost and the daughter you found. I think love multiplies instead of dividing. I think caring about you doesn't diminish what I felt for Emma. It honors it by proving that my capacity for love survived losing her." Mia considered this with the serious attention she gave all concepts that might affect her emotional safety. What if I never look less like her? What if seeing me always reminds you of what you lost? Then I'll learn to see the reminder as a gift instead of a wound. I'll learn to be grateful that something beautiful came from something terrible. That's a pretty speech. It's also a promise. We'll see. Yes, we will. They were interrupted by movement in the junkyard. The searchers were expanding their perimeter, moving closer to the industrial district where Ryan and Mia were hidden. Their conversation about the past would have to wait. The present was demanding their attention with the urgency of people who wanted them dead. "Time to move," Mia said, shouldering her backpack. "But Ryan..." "Yeah. Thank you for telling me about Emma. And for not expecting me to be her. Thank you for asking. And for helping me understand the difference between replacing her and honoring her." As they prepared to relocate to a safer position, both of them carried the weight of stories that had been shared, wounds that had been acknowledged, and the growing understanding that healing could happen between two people who'd both lost everything and found each other in the wreckage. The kidnappers were still hunting them, the threat was still real, and the future was still uncertain. But they were no longer strangers trying to help each other. They were family trying to protect each other, and that made all the difference in the world. Their new hideout was an abandoned auto repair shop 3 blocks from the junkyard, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls marking it as another casualty of economic decline in Riverside's industrial district. Mia had led them there through a maze of alleyways and forgotten passages, her knowledge of the urban landscape continuing to amaze Ryan with its thoroughness and tactical sophistication. "How many places like this do you know?" Ryan asked as they settled into what had once been the shop's office, now stripped of everything valuable, but still offering shelter and concealment. "Dozens," Mia replied, spreading her sleeping bag on the cleanest section of floor she could find. When you live outside the system, you learn every place the system doesn't look. The casual way she discussed homelessness infrastructure reminded Ryan that for 6 months, Mia had been living in a parallel world that existed alongside conventional society, but remained invisible to people with homes, jobs, and legal addresses. She'd become an expert in urban survival, in finding resources that others discarded, in staying safe in spaces that others abandoned. "Are you hungry?" Ryan asked, realizing they hadn't eaten since early morning, and that his corporate lifestyle had never required him to think about meal planning during crisis situations. "Always," Mia said matter-of-factly. "But I've got energy bars and water bottles. That'll hold us until we figure out our next move." Energy bars aren't a real meal. Real meals are for people with real kitchens. Energy bars are for people who need calories to keep thinking clearly. Ryan watched her portion out food with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to make limited supplies last as long as possible, and felt another layer of understanding about the life she'd been living. Every resource was precious. Every decision was calculated for maximum survival value. Every comfort was secondary to basic necessity. "Mia," he said carefully, "when this is over, when we're safe, you won't have to live like this anymore. You won't have to ration food, or sleep in abandoned buildings, or worry about where your next meal is coming from. When this is over, you might change your mind about wanting to take care of someone like me." "What do you mean, someone like you?" "Someone who doesn't know how to live in houses. Someone who hoards food even when there's plenty. Someone who checks exit routes in every room and sleeps with one eye open." The list of behaviors she expected to be problematic revealed the depth of her adaptation to survival living. Mia had developed habits and instincts that were essential for staying alive on the streets, but would seem paranoid and dysfunctional in conventional domestic settings. "Those sound like smart survival skills," Ryan said. "They sound like things that kept you alive when no one else was protecting you. They sound like things that make social workers write reports about maladaptive behaviors and failure to integrate into family structures. They sound like things that prove you're remarkably capable and resilient. You say that now. Wait until you see what it actually looks like when someone who's been living like a feral animal tries to act like a normal kid." Ryan moved closer to where she sat, close enough to see the genuine fear in her eyes despite her matter-of-fact tone. "Mia, look at me." She met his gaze reluctantly, as if expecting to see disappointment or doubt in his expression. "I don't want a normal kid," he said clearly. "I want you. The you who figured out how to survive on your own at 8 years old. The you who built a home from scrap metal and determination. The you who risked your life to save a stranger and then had the courage to trust that stranger with your safety. That me comes with a lot of complications. Good. Complicated people are interesting. Complicated people have stories worth hearing and perspectives worth learning from. Complicated people know things that simple people never figure out." "Like what?" "Like how to find safety when the world feels dangerous. Like how to make something from nothing. Like how to keep hope alive when everything seems hopeless." Mia was quiet for a moment, processing this reframing of characteristics she'd been taught to see as deficits. "You really don't want me to be normal? I really don't want you to be anyone but yourself. Normal is overrated anyway. How do you know? You've probably been normal your entire life. I've been successful my entire life. That's not the same as normal. Normal people don't build billion-dollar companies. Normal people don't have kidnappers hunting them. Normal people don't find themselves hiding in abandoned auto shops with 8-year-olds who know more about survival than most adults." Despite everything, Mia smiled. The first real smile Ryan had seen from her since they'd met. "So we're both weird. We're both exceptional. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Weird suggests something's wrong with you. Exceptional means you're capable of things other people aren't. And you think I'm exceptional? I think you're the most exceptional person I've ever met. I think you've done things that would break most adults, survived situations that would destroy most people, and somehow managed to keep enough humanity intact to care about a stranger's welfare." Mia pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them in a gesture that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "What if I can't learn to live in a house? What if I can't go to school or make friends or do any of the things normal families do? Then we'll figure out alternatives. Homeschooling instead of traditional school. Tutors who come to us instead of classrooms full of strangers. Gradual adjustment instead of sudden immersion. You do that? Change your whole life to accommodate my weirdness. I'd do that to give you the kind of life you deserve. Besides, my life needs changing anyway. Being a workaholic CEO hasn't exactly brought me joy. What would bring you joy? The question caught Ryan off guard. He'd spent 3 years focused on managing grief and guilt, on building business success as a distraction from personal failure. He hadn't thought about joy in so long that the concept felt foreign. I think, he said slowly, watching you learn to feel safe would bring me joy. Seeing you discover things you're interested in when you're not just focused on survival. Helping you figure out what you want to be when you grow up instead of just helping you grow up at all. That sounds like a lot of work. The best things usually are. And if I never feel completely safe? If I always have nightmares and trust issues and survival habits? Then we work with that. We find ways to help you feel as safe as possible. And we respect that complete safety might not be achievable for someone who's been through what you've been through. You've really thought about this. I've been thinking about it since the moment you freed me from those ropes. Maybe before that. Maybe since the moment I saw your face and realized that grief doesn't have to be the end of love, just a different kind of beginning. Mia studied his face with the intensity she brought to all important assessments. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think Emma would like me? If she were alive, if she could meet me, do you think she'd want to be my sister? The question hit Ryan with unexpected force. He'd been so focused on separating his feelings for Mia from his grief for Emma that he hadn't considered how Emma herself might have felt about this impossible situation. I think, he said carefully, Emma would love you. I think she'd love your courage and your intelligence and your determination to protect people who matter to you. I think she'd want to learn your survival skills and teach you her pancake recipe. Really? Really? Emma always loved people who were different, who had interesting stories, who could teach her things she'd never thought about before. You would have been exactly the kind of person she'd want as a friend. Or sister. Or sister. Mia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer than he'd heard it before. I've never had a sister. I've never had anyone who wanted to share things with me or teach me things just because they liked me. You have someone now. You have me, and through me, you have Emma's memory. And maybe someday, when you're ready, you'll have other people too, friends, teachers, people who care about you because of who you are. That sounds nice. Scary, but nice. The best things usually are both. Have you ever found family in unexpected places or people? Share your thoughts on how love can grow between people who choose each other rather than being born to each other. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of engines in the distance. Multiple vehicles moving through the industrial district in what sounded like a search pattern. Ryan and Mia both went silent, listening to determine whether the sounds were getting closer or moving away. They're expanding the search, Mia whispered. Getting more systematic about it. How long before they find us here? Depends on how many places they know to look. But this isn't sustainable long term. We can't keep running forever. What do you suggest? We need to change the game. Instead of just hiding from them, we need to figure out how to make them stop looking. How do we do that? Information first. We need to know who's really behind this, what they want, whether it's just about money or something more personal. And then we decide whether to give them what they want, take away what they want, or make them want something else instead. Ryan looked at this 8-year-old who spoke like a military strategist and felt a mixture of admiration and sorrow that was becoming familiar. Mia's tactical intelligence was remarkable, but it had been developed under circumstances that no child should have to face. Those all sound dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. The question is whether we face the danger reactively or proactively. What's the difference? Reactive means we keep running until they catch us or give up. Proactive means we take control of the situation and force them to react to us instead. And you know how to do that. I know how to gather information without being noticed. I know how to move around without being seen. I know how to make adults underestimate me because they think kids can't be threats. Mia, you're 8 years old. You shouldn't have to think like this. I'm 8 years old who's been taking care of herself for 6 months. Age doesn't change capability. It was the same argument she'd made earlier, But now Ryan understood it differently. Mia wasn't trying to prove she was mature beyond her years. She was trying to prove that her survival skills had value, that her unconventional abilities could contribute to their shared safety. "Okay," he said. "We gather information proactively. But we do it together, and if things get too dangerous, we call for help." Define too dangerous. Define together. Fair enough. Mia smiled again, and Ryan realized that their negotiation about safety protocols felt more like family planning than crisis management. "What kind of help would we call for?" "I have resources. Security companies, private investigators, lawyers who specialize in corporate threats. People who know how to handle situations like this. And if calling those people means I get turned over to social services, then we find a way to handle the situation that protects both of us. You promise?" "I promise. Even if protecting me costs you money or reputation or business opportunities?" "Even then. Especially then." Mia nodded slowly, and Ryan could see her making the internal adjustment from solitary survival to partnership, from protecting only herself to being part of a team with mutual obligations and shared risks. "Okay," she said. "We do this together. But I need you to understand something." "What?" "If this goes wrong, if we get caught or hurt or separated, I need you to know that these last 2 days have been the best 2 days of my life." "Why?" "Because for the first time ever, someone looked at me and saw potential instead of problems. Someone wanted to protect me instead of control me. Someone chose me instead of just tolerating me." The simple honesty of her statement hit Ryan harder than any declaration of love could have. In 2 days, they'd given each other things that neither had experienced in years. For Ryan, a reason to hope and protect and love again. For Mia, the experience of being genuinely wanted and valued and chosen. "Mia," he said, "whatever happens next, I need you to know that meeting you has been the most important thing that's happened to me since Emma died. You've reminded me that love doesn't end with loss, it just finds new forms. So we're family now? Officially? We're family now. Officially and completely." "Good," Mia said, standing up and shouldering her backpack with renewed determination. "Because families protect each other, and it's time to start protecting ourselves by taking control of this situation." As they prepared to leave their temporary shelter and begin the proactive phase of their survival strategy, Ryan realized that somewhere in the past 2 days, he'd stopped thinking of Mia as the child who reminded him of Emma and started thinking of her as simply his daughter. Different from Emma, but equally precious, equally deserving of protection and love. And Mia had stopped thinking of Ryan as another adult who might disappoint her and started thinking of him as her father. Not perfect, but committed, not infallible, but trustworthy in the ways that mattered most. They were still in danger, still being hunted by people who wanted Ryan dead and would hurt Mia to achieve that goal. But they were no longer facing that danger as strangers who happened to need each other. They were facing it as family who had chosen each other, and that made them stronger than the sum of their individual capabilities. The kidnappers might have superior numbers and resources, but Ryan and Mia had something more powerful. The desperate determination of people who had found love in impossible circumstances and would do anything to protect it. It was time to stop running and start fighting back. The plan they'd developed was elegant in its simplicity. Mia would use her invisibility skills to get close enough to the kidnappers to gather intelligence, while Ryan used his corporate connections to investigate the business motivations behind his abduction. Together, they'd assemble enough information to either neutralize the threat or call in the kind of professional help that could end it permanently. What they hadn't planned for was the arrival of Child Protective Services. Ryan Blackwell? The woman standing in the doorway of the abandoned auto shop wore the tired expression of a social worker who'd seen too many crisis situations and had no patience for complications. "I'm Jennifer Walsh from CPS. We need to talk." Ryan felt Mia go rigid beside him, her body language shifting instantly from relaxed partnership to fight-or-flight readiness. The easy family dynamic they'd been building for 2 days shattered like glass, replaced by the stark reality of a system that didn't recognize their unconventional bond. "How did you find us?" Ryan asked, stepping slightly in front of Mia in a protective gesture that probably looked suspicious to someone trained to spot inappropriate adult-child relationships. Anonymous tip. Someone reported seeing a man matching your description with an unaccompanied minor in this area. Jennifer's eyes moved to Mia, taking in the dirty clothes, the wary posture, the obvious signs of someone who'd been living rough. "Honey, are you okay? Has this man hurt you?" "Don't talk to her," Mia said sharply, grabbing Ryan's hand with desperate strength. "Don't tell them anything. They'll separate us." "Miss, I need you to step away from Mr. Blackwell, so we can talk privately," Jennifer said, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to managing frightened children. "You're not in trouble, but I need to make sure you're safe." "I am safe," Mia replied, but her voice was rising with panic. "I'm safer than I've ever been. Don't take me away from him." "Sir, I need you to release the child's hand and step back," Jennifer said to Ryan, her tone becoming more official. "Any resistance will be noted in my report." Ryan found himself in an impossible position. Complying with Jennifer's instructions would terrify Mia and probably trigger her to run, which would make him look guilty of something inappropriate. But refusing would confirm whatever suspicions had brought CPS to this abandoned building in the first place. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said carefully. "Mia and I are together by choice. She's not being held against her will. Mr. Blackwell, you're a 36-year-old man who's been reported missing for 2 days, and you're currently hiding in an abandoned building with an 8-year-old girl who appears to be homeless. Regardless of anyone's choices, this situation requires immediate intervention." "You don't understand," Mia said, her voice breaking with desperation. "He saved me. We saved each other. We're family now. Honey, adults who aren't related to you can't just decide to be your family. There are legal processes, background checks, home studies." "Legal processes that don't work," Mia interrupted, tears starting to stream down her face. "Legal processes that put kids with people who hurt them and take them away from people who actually care about them." "Miss Walsh," Ryan said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the panic he could feel building in his chest. "I understand this looks suspicious, but there are extenuating circumstances. Mia and I are both in danger from people who've been trying to kill me. She saved my life, and I'm trying to protect hers. Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me so we can sort this out at the office. The child will be placed in emergency foster care until we can determine." "No." Mia's scream echoed off the concrete walls with the force of absolute terror. "You can't put me back in foster care. I won't go. I won't let you." She was backing toward the shop's rear exit, her survival instincts overriding the trust she'd been building with Ryan. Jennifer moved to block her path, and Ryan could see disaster unfolding in real time. "Mia, wait," he said, but she was already running, disappearing through a hole in the building's back wall that was too small for adults to follow. "Miss," Jennifer called after her. "Come back. You're not in trouble." But Mia was gone, vanished into the urban landscape she knew better than anyone, leaving Ryan alone with a social worker who was now looking at him with undisguised suspicion. "Mr. Blackwell," Jennifer said, pulling out a phone, "I'm going to need you to come with me while we locate the child and sort out this situation." "You don't understand," Ryan said desperately. "Mia has been living on her own for 6 months. She's terrified of the foster care system because it's failed her repeatedly. If you try to force her back into placement, she'll disappear completely. That's not your concern, sir. Your concern right now should be explaining why a wealthy CEO was hiding in an abandoned building with a runaway child. Because people are trying to kill me, and she's the one who saved my life. Because we found each other when we both needed family. Because sometimes the system gets it wrong, and people have to take care of each other outside official channels. Mr. Blackwell, those are serious allegations, and if they're true, then both you and the child should be in protective custody through proper channels. But right now, all I see is an inappropriate situation that needs immediate intervention." Ryan realized that explaining their situation would require telling the story of his kidnapping, which would mean police involvement, which would mean media attention, which would make Mia even more vulnerable to the kind of systemic interference she'd been avoiding by living alone. What if I could prove that Mia is better off with me than in foster care? He asked. What if I could provide evidence that she's been thriving under my protection? Mr. Blackwell, children don't thrive while hiding in abandoned buildings. Children thrive in stable homes with proper supervision, education, and medical care. Mia has been more stable in 2 days with me than she was in 6 months on her own, or however long she spent being shuttled between foster families that didn't want her. That's not a legal standard, sir. The legal standard is appropriate care through licensed channels. And if the licensed channels have already failed her repeatedly, if the system has already proven it can't protect her, then we work within the system to find better solutions. But we don't abandon the system entirely. Ryan felt the impossibility of their situation settling around him like a trap. The social services system that was supposed to protect children, like Mia, was the same system that had failed her so completely that she'd chosen homelessness over institutional care. And now that system was prepared to separate them based on suspicions and procedures, rather than evidence of actual harm or benefit. Miss Walsh, he said, making a decision that felt both desperate and necessary, I want to formally request to begin adoption proceedings for Mia. Sir, that's not how adoption works. You can't just decide to adopt a child you found 2 days ago. Why not? If she has no family, if she's been failed by foster care, if she wants to be with me, and I can provide for her, why shouldn't we be able to choose each other? Because there are processes, Mr. Blackwell. Background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations, waiting periods. The system exists to protect children from impulsive decisions made by adults who might not understand the full implications of raising a traumatized child. The system exists to protect children, period. If Mia is safer and happier with me than she would be in emergency foster placement, then the system should support that, not prevent it. The system can't make decisions based on 2 days of observation, especially when those 2 days were spent hiding in abandoned buildings under circumstances that remain unexplained. Ryan felt the weight of bureaucratic impossibility crushing his newfound hope. Every argument he made was reasonable, but irrelevant to a system designed around procedures rather than outcomes, regulations rather than relationships. What happens now? He asked. Now we locate the child and place her in emergency care while we investigate the circumstances of your relationship. You'll be interviewed extensively, background checks will be run, and if there's evidence of inappropriate conduct, charges will be filed. And Mia will be placed with a licensed foster family where she can receive proper care while this situation is resolved. The same kind of licensed foster families that hurt her before? The same system that failed to protect her from abuse and neglect. Mr. Blackwell, I understand your concern, but individual negative experiences don't invalidate the entire foster care system. Most placements are successful, most families are appropriate, and most children benefit from professional oversight. Most isn't good enough for Mia. Mia has already been harmed by the exceptions, and she's already found stability outside the system. Why force her back into something that's already proved dangerous for her? Because it's the law, sir. Because children belong in supervised, licensed care, not in informal arrangements with adults they've known for 2 days. Ryan stared at Jennifer Walsh, seeing in her tired face the weight of a system that meant well, but often harmed the very people it was designed to protect. She wasn't evil or malicious. She was just following procedures that made sense in most cases, but created devastating exceptions for children like Mia. What if I could prove that I'm a fit guardian? He asked. What if I submitted to every background check, every evaluation, every requirement you have? That's a process that takes months, Mr. Blackwell. Emergency placement happens today. And in the meantime, Mia runs away from whatever foster family you place her with, goes back to living on the streets, and disappears completely. If she runs away, we'll find her and place her in a more secure setting. A more secure setting? You mean institutional care? You mean treating a child who's already been traumatized like a criminal? I mean providing appropriate supervision for a child who's demonstrated an inability to remain in traditional foster care. The conversation was interrupted by Ryan's phone ringing. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something about the timing made him answer despite Jennifer's obvious disapproval. Ryan Blackwell. Mr. Blackwell, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with LAPD. We've been investigating your disappearance, and we need to speak with you immediately about your kidnappers. I'm here. I'm safe. But there are complications. Sir, we're aware of the complications. We're also aware that you're currently with a minor who may be in danger. We need both of you to come in immediately. Ryan looked at Jennifer, who was clearly listening to every word of the conversation. Detective, the minor in question is someone who saved my life. She's not in danger from me. She's in danger from being returned to a system that's already failed her. Mr. Blackwell, that's not for you to determine. We have protocols for protecting children in situations like this. Protocols that will separate us despite the fact that we're both safer together than apart. Sir, I need you to stop arguing with social services and come in immediately. Your kidnappers have escalated their efforts to find you, and staying hidden is no longer a viable option. The implications hit Ryan like a physical blow. If the kidnappers had escalated their search, if law enforcement was involved, if the situation was becoming public, then Mia was in even more danger. Not just from the original threat, but from the media attention and systemic intervention that would follow. Detective, he said, I'll come in, but I need guarantees about the child's safety and placement. Mr. Blackwell, that's not within my authority. Child welfare decisions are made by social services. Then I need to speak with someone whose authority includes keeping families together when separation would cause more harm than protection. Sir, you're not this child's family. You've known her for 2 days. I'm the closest thing to family she's ever had. I'm the first adult who's ever chosen to protect her instead of control her. I'm the person she trusts, and trust is something she doesn't give easily or often. Mr. Blackwell, please report to the Riverside Police Station immediately. We'll sort out the family issues after we deal with the security threats. The call ended, leaving Ryan alone with Jennifer, and the crushing realization that every system designed to help them was about to tear apart the family they'd built from mutual rescue and desperate love. You heard the detective, Jennifer said. This situation is now a police matter as well as a child welfare issue, which means Mia will be even more terrified and even more likely to run, which means she needs professional protection, not amateur heroics from someone who doesn't understand the complexities of caring for traumatized children. I understand that she's been more stable and happy in 2 days with me than she's been in 8 years with your system. Mr. Blackwell, your feelings are understandable, but they don't constitute a legal basis for custody. Emotional attachment isn't the same as qualified guardianship. Ryan looked around the abandoned auto shop where he and Mia had planned their future together, where they'd shared stories and built trust and discovered that love could grow in the most unlikely circumstances. In a few hours, it would all be dismantled by well-meaning people following reasonable procedures that would destroy the most important thing either of them had ever found. Jennifer, he said, using her first name in a desperate attempt to reach the person beneath the professional role. What would it take for you to consider that sometimes the system gets it wrong? What would it take for you to believe that some children are better off outside traditional placement? Evidence, Mr. Blackwell. Documented evidence of abuse in licensed care, proof of stability in alternative arrangements, and legal guardianship established through proper channels. And how long do those proper channels take? Months, sometimes years. And in the meantime, Mia goes back to the system that's already failed her, loses the first stable relationship she's ever had, and learns once again that trusting adults leads to abandonment and betrayal. Mr. Blackwell, I understand your frustration, but individual cases can't override established procedures, even when those procedures cause more harm than protection. Especially then, because exceptions to procedures create precedents that can be exploited by people with less noble intentions. Ryan felt the final piece of his hope crumble. The system wasn't evil. It was just incapable of recognizing exceptions, unable to adapt to circumstances that didn't fit standard categories, unwilling to prioritize outcomes over processes. "What happens if I refuse to cooperate?" he asked. "Then we'll find the child anyway, and you'll face charges for interfering with a child welfare investigation. And if I cooperate fully? Then we'll process this situation according to established protocols, and hopefully everyone will be safer when it's resolved. Safer, but not necessarily happier. Not necessarily together. Mr. Blackwell, happiness isn't the legal standard for child welfare. Safety is. And if Mia was safer with me, then she'll be in emergency foster placement. That's not a determination you're qualified to make." As they prepared to leave the auto shop and begin the process that would dismantle everything he and Mia had built together, Ryan realized that the greatest threat to their family wasn't the kidnappers who wanted him dead. It was the system that was designed to protect them, but couldn't recognize that some families were created by choice rather than birth. Some bonds were forged in crisis rather than comfort. Some love was built from desperate circumstances rather than ideal conditions. Somewhere in the urban maze of Riverside, Mia was hiding, alone again, betrayed again by the system that was supposed to protect her. And Ryan was about to be forced into cooperation with that same system, trading his freedom to search for her for the slim hope that official channels might eventually recognize what they'd built together. The shatter point had arrived, and it looked exactly like help. The Riverside police station felt like a monument to institutional bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick, plastic chairs designed for endurance rather than comfort, and the constant hum of activity that suggested important things were happening, but never quite explained what those things were. Ryan sat in Detective Martinez's office, staring at photos of his kidnappers, while Jennifer Walsh completed paperwork that would officially designate Mia as a missing child in need of protective services. "We've identified the men who took you," Detective Martinez said, sliding a file across her desk. "Tommy Hendricks and Carlos Ruiz, both former employees of companies your acquisitions forced to downsize. They've been planning this for months." Ryan looked at the mug shots of the men who'd nearly killed him, but his mind was focused on a different kind of threat. What about the child who's missing? What resources are being devoted to finding her? "Mr. Blackwell, I understand your concern, but Miss Williams is considered a runaway, not a kidnapping victim. Different protocols, different priority levels. She's 8 years old, alone on the streets, being hunted by people who want to kill me. How is that not a priority? Because she's not technically your child, and she chose to run rather than accept protective services. The system treats voluntary separation differently than forced abduction." "Voluntary?" Ryan's voice rose with disbelief. "She ran because she's terrified of being put back in foster care, not because she doesn't want protection. Mr. Blackwell, I sympathize with your attachment to this child, but you have to understand that from a legal perspective, you have no standing to make decisions about her welfare. From a human perspective, I'm the person she trusts. I'm the family she chose. I'm the one responsible for protecting her. From a legal perspective, you're a stranger who's known her for 3 days." Detective Martinez consulted her notes with the efficiency of someone who'd handled hundreds of similar cases. "The good news is that we've located Hendricks and Ruiz. They're being brought in for questioning, and we expect to have the full scope of their operation mapped out within hours." "What about whoever hired them? You said they'd been planning this for months. That suggests organization beyond 2 disgruntled employees. We're investigating all angles, but our immediate priority is your safety and the completion of the child welfare case. My safety is connected to Mia's safety. Those men saw her face, heard her voice. If they get out on bail, if they have associates still looking for me, she's a target. Mr. Blackwell, that's exactly why she needs to be in protective custody through official channels instead of hiding on the streets with you. She's hiding on the streets because your official channels scared her away from the first real family she's ever had." Detective Martinez and Jennifer Walsh exchanged a look that Ryan recognized as professional frustration with a civilian who didn't understand how systems worked. They weren't malicious. They were just operating within frameworks that prioritized procedures over people, regulations over relationships. "Sir," Jennifer said, joining the conversation with a folder full of forms, "I've completed the initial paperwork for Miss Williams. She's officially a ward of the state as of this afternoon, which means any adult who locates her has a legal obligation to bring her in for placement." "What if the adult who locates her is me?" "Then you're legally required to contact social services immediately and surrender her to our custody." "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll be charged with kidnapping, child endangerment, and interference with a child welfare investigation." Ryan stared at the two women who held Mia's fate in their hands, understanding that he was facing a choice between legal compliance and moral responsibility, between following procedures that would separate them and taking actions that would make him a criminal. "What are my options?" he asked. "Complete cooperation with both investigations," Detective Martinez replied. "Help us resolve the kidnapping case, comply with social services regarding the child, and let the professionals handle both situations. And if cooperation results in Mia being placed with another foster family that hurts her, then she reports the abuse and gets moved to a different placement. She's already tried reporting abuse. The system didn't believe her. Mr. Blackwell, isolated incidents of system failure don't justify abandoning the system entirely. They justify finding alternatives for children the system has already failed. Not legal alternatives, sir." Ryan felt the walls of legal impossibility closing around him. Every path forward seemed to require sacrificing either Mia's welfare or his own freedom, choosing between protecting her and maintaining his ability to protect her, between love and law. His phone rang, interrupting the circular argument that was consuming his afternoon. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but given the circumstances, he answered despite the obvious disapproval of both officials. "Ryan Blackwell." "Mr. Blackwell?" The voice was young, female, and terrified. "It's Mia. I need help." Ryan's heart stopped. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm okay for now, but those men found me. They're looking for me, and they know I helped you escape." "Mia, where are you exactly?" "I can't tell you over the phone. But Ryan, I need you to know something. I heard what that social worker said about making me a ward of the state. I know they want to put me back in foster care." Ryan looked at Detective Martinez and Jennifer Walsh, both of whom were clearly listening to every word of the conversation. "Mia, there are people here who want to help you. Official people with resources and legal authority. I don't want help from people who think they know what's best for me without asking what I actually need." "What do you actually need?" "I need you. I need my family. I need the person who chose me instead of just being assigned to me. Mia." "Ryan, I'm going to disappear. I'm going to go somewhere they can't find me, and I'm going to live the way I was living before I met you. Unless what? Unless you choose me over their rules. Unless you decide that being my family matters more than being legal." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down between love and law, between personal responsibility and social compliance. Ryan could see Detective Martinez reaching for her phone to trace the call, could see Jennifer Walsh preparing to coordinate an immediate search for Mia's location. "Mia, I understand if you can't do it," she continued, her voice breaking with the effort of staying strong. "I understand if following their rules is more important than keeping our promises to each other. But I need to know now, because if you're going to choose their system over our family, I need to disappear before they force us apart." "Miss Williams," Jennifer said loudly enough for Mia to hear, "you're not in trouble. We just want to make sure you're safe." "I was safe," Mia replied, her voice carrying clearly through the phone. "I was safer than I'd ever been, until you decided that your definition of safety was more important than mine. Honey, 8-year-olds don't get to define their own safety standards. That's what adults are for. Adults are for hurting kids and then telling them it was for their own good. Adults are for making promises they don't keep and rules that don't make sense." "Mia," Ryan said, his voice urgent with the growing certainty that this conversation would determine the rest of both their lives. "What do you need me to do?" "Meet me. Alone. Without cops or social workers, or anyone who thinks they know better than we do about what our family should look like. Detective Martinez was already signaling for backup, already coordinating what would become a manhunt for an 8-year-old who'd committed no crime except choosing her own family. Jennifer Walsh was preparing paperwork that would escalate Mia's case to emergency intervention status. "If I meet you," Ryan said carefully, "if I choose our family over their system, there won't be any going back. I'll be a criminal, and you'll be a fugitive. I've been a fugitive my whole life. The only difference is whether I'm running alone or with someone who loves me. When have you had to choose between doing what's right and doing what's legal? Share your thoughts on the courage it takes to follow your heart when systems fail." Ryan looked at the two women who represented everything reasonable and procedural about child protection, then thought about Mia hiding somewhere in Riverside, alone and terrified because the system designed to protect her had driven her away from the first real safety she'd ever known. "Mia," he said, making a decision that would either save them both or destroy them both. "Tell me where you are." "Mr. Blackwell," Detective Martinez said sharply, "you're about to make a choice that will result in criminal charges and permanent separation from this child. I'm about to make a choice that will determine whether Mia spends the rest of her childhood in institutions or grows up with someone who actually loves her. Sir, emotional attachment doesn't constitute legal guardianship. Legal guardianship doesn't constitute love." "Ryan." Mia's voice was small and hopeful through the phone. "Are you choosing me?" "I'm choosing us. I'm choosing the family we built together over the system that wants to tear us apart. Even if it means running away, even if it means being criminals, even if it means spending the rest of our lives proving that love matters more than law. Old railroad bridge, east side of town. There's a drainage tunnel underneath. I'll be waiting." The line went dead, leaving Ryan facing two officials who were already moving to coordinate his arrest and Mia's apprehension. "Mr. Blackwell," Detective Martinez said, standing and reaching for her handcuffs, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to interfere with a child welfare investigation. I'm exercising my right to protect someone I love from a system that's already harmed her. You're kidnapping a ward of the state. I'm choosing my daughter over your bureaucracy." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Ryan felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. For 3 years, he'd been consumed by guilt over failing to protect Emma when she needed him most. Now, faced with the choice between protecting Mia and protecting himself, the decision was impossibly easy. "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Martinez recited as she led him toward the door. "I waive that right," Ryan said. "I want everyone to understand that I'm making this choice voluntarily, with full understanding of the consequences, because protecting my daughter is more important than protecting my freedom. Mr. Blackwell, this isn't going to end the way you think it will. It's going to end with Mia knowing that someone finally chose her over the system. It's going to end with her understanding that love sometimes requires sacrifice. It's going to end with both of us learning that family isn't about legal documents. It's about commitment that survives even when everything else falls apart." As they walked through the police station toward the holding cells, Ryan realized that he was facing the same choice Emma had never had the chance to make. Whether to trust the system or trust love, whether to follow rules or follow his heart, whether to choose safety or choose family. Emma had been killed by a drunk driver while walking home from school because Ryan had prioritized work over presence. Now Mia was facing separation and institutional care because the system prioritized procedures over people. The difference was that this time, Ryan was choosing love over everything else. This time, he was putting his daughter's welfare ahead of his own convenience. This time, he was proving that some things were worth any sacrifice, even if it cost him everything he'd built since Emma's death. Even if it meant giving up his freedom, his company, his carefully constructed life. Even if it meant becoming a criminal to remain a father. The choice was made. Now he had to live with the consequences, and help Mia understand that sometimes being family meant being willing to lose everything except each other. In 3 hours, he'd be released on bail. In 3 hours and 5 minutes, he'd be driving toward the old railroad bridge, where his daughter was waiting for him to prove that love was stronger than law, that family was more powerful than bureaucracy, that some promises were worth keeping even when keeping them made you an outlaw. It was the first completely selfless decision he'd made since Emma died, and it felt like the first completely right decision he'd made since Emma died. Mia was waiting for him to choose her over everyone else's definition of what was appropriate, legal, or sensible. And for the first time in 3 years, Ryan was ready to put love first and let everything else figure itself out afterward. 18 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the small house in Mendocino, California, painting the kitchen table, where Mia sat working through her homeschool math problems with the focused concentration she brought to everything that mattered to her. At 9 years old, she'd grown 3 inches and gained 15 pounds of healthy weight, but more importantly, she'd gained something that couldn't be measured: the quiet confidence of a child who knew she was genuinely wanted. "Dad, I don't understand this word problem," she said, looking up from her worksheet with the easy trust of someone who'd learned that asking for help didn't make her vulnerable. Ryan glanced over from where he was making breakfast, noting with satisfaction that she'd called him Dad without hesitation or self-consciousness. It had taken 8 months for her to use the word naturally, but now it came as easily as breathing. "Which one?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the math worksheet that was part of the comprehensive curriculum they'd developed together. "The one about the train traveling from Chicago to Denver. It doesn't make sense to me why anyone would need to calculate how fast the train is going. If you're on the train, you just look out the window." Ryan smiled at her practical approach to abstract problems. Mia's intelligence had always been grounded in real-world application rather than theoretical concepts, which made traditional education methods challenging, but also made her insights surprisingly sophisticated. "Math problems aren't always about real situations," he explained, settling into the chair beside her. "Sometimes they're about learning to think through problems step by step, even when the situation is imaginary. But why not use real problems? Like figuring out how much food to buy for a month, or how long it takes to walk from here to town. Those are excellent math problems. Do you want to work on those instead? Can we?" "Of course. Your education, your choice." The flexibility to adapt Mia's learning to her interests and strengths was one of the unexpected benefits of their unconventional life. After fleeing California 18 months ago, they'd established residence in a small coastal town where Ryan's wealth could provide security without attracting attention, where Mia could attend school remotely while receiving the specialized support she needed to recover from years of educational disruption. "Dad," Mia said as she started creating word problems based on their actual household budget. "Yeah. Do you miss your old life? The company and the money and all the stuff you gave up?" It was a question she asked periodically, usually when she was feeling particularly secure and therefore able to contemplate the possibility that her presence in his life might have cost him things he valued. Ryan had learned to answer honestly without making her feel guilty for the choices he'd made to protect their family. "I miss some things," he said, pouring orange juice into glasses that had come from the local thrift store. "I miss the feeling of building something big and important. I miss working with smart people on complicated problems. But I don't miss the loneliness. I don't miss caring more about stock prices than people. I don't miss living like Emma's death was the end of love, instead of just the end of one kind of love. So you're happy we ran away? I'm happy we chose each other, whether we had to run away or not." The life they'd built in Mendocino was modest compared to Ryan's previous existence, but rich in ways that net worth couldn't measure. He'd used a fraction of his liquid assets to purchase the small house with cash, established new identities that would allow Mia to live safely outside the foster care system, and created a quiet life focused on her healing and their relationship rather than corporate achievement. Ryan Caldwell and his daughter, Emma Caldwell, were unremarkable residents of a small town where people minded their own business and asked few questions about newcomers who paid their bills on time and contributed to community life. The irony of Mia living under Emma's name hadn't been lost on either of them, but it felt appropriate rather than painful. Emma's memory protecting Mia's future, Love transcending death through bureaucratic necessity. Speaking of running away, Ryan said, checking the clock on the kitchen wall. We have a meeting with Dr. Peterson in an hour. Do I have to? You have to do things that help you stay healthy and happy. Dr. Peterson helps you stay healthy and happy. Dr. Peterson asks hard questions. Dr. Peterson helps you process hard feelings. Mia's therapy sessions were a non-negotiable part of their routine, one of the few aspects of conventional child welfare that Ryan insisted on maintaining despite their unconventional circumstances. Dr. Peterson was a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery, and she'd been working with Mia for over a year to help her develop healthy coping mechanisms for the abuse and abandonment she'd experienced before Ryan found her. Will you wait for me during the session? Always. Even when she asks about the scary stuff? Especially when she asks about the scary stuff. Mia nodded with the matter-of-fact acceptance she'd developed for necessary but difficult things. Therapy was hard work, but it was her work, and she'd learned to approach it with the same determination she brought to survival, as something challenging but essential for building the life she wanted. Dad, she said as they prepared to leave for town. Yeah, I had the dream about the foster father again last night. Ryan felt the familiar clench of protective anger whenever Mia's past trauma surfaced, but he'd learned to manage his emotional response in ways that helped rather than hindered her healing. The scary one or the sad one? The scary one. But this time you were there, and you told him he couldn't hurt me anymore. How did that feel? Safe. It felt safe to have someone bigger than me tell him to stop. You are safe, Mia. No one is ever going to hurt you like that again. I know, but sometimes my brain forgets and thinks I'm still alone. When your brain forgets, what helps you remember? Looking around and seeing our house. Seeing your coffee cup in the sink and knowing you're really here. Remembering that you chose me even when choosing me was hard. The progress she'd made in understanding and articulating her emotional experiences was remarkable. But Ryan knew that trauma recovery was measured in years, not months. Mia might always struggle with nightmares, trust issues, and the hypervigilance that had kept her alive during the worst periods of her life. I will always choose you, he said, the daily affirmation that had become as routine as breakfast. Even when choosing you is hard. Even when other people don't understand. Even when the whole world thinks we're doing things wrong. I know, Mia said, and the confidence in her voice was worth every sacrifice he'd made to earn it. What does family mean to you beyond blood relations? Share your thoughts on how love and commitment can create bonds that transcend traditional definitions. The drive to town took them past the elementary school where Mia would have attended if they'd chosen conventional education, past the social services office that would have overseen her placement if they'd remained within legal systems, past the life they might have had if Ryan had chosen compliance over love. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed? Mia asked, echoing his thoughts as they pulled into Dr. Peterson's parking lot. Sometimes. Do you? Sometimes. But then I remember what foster care felt like, and I know we made the right choice. Even though it means we have to be careful about who we trust. Even though being careful is better than being hurt. Dr. Peterson's office was a testament to child-centered design. Comfortable furniture, natural lighting, toys and art supplies available for nonverbal expression, and the kind of calm environment that helped traumatized children feel safe enough to do the hard work of healing. Good morning, Emma, Dr. Peterson said, using the name that had become as natural as breathing for all of them. How was your week? Good. I finished the book about the girl who lived in the woods, and I started learning about fractions, and I only had the nightmare twice instead of every night. That sounds like progress on multiple fronts. What do you think helped with the nightmares? Talking about them with Dad instead of trying to handle them by myself. Ryan settled into the waiting area with a book, but his attention was focused on the conversation happening in the next room. 18 months of therapy had taught him to recognize the rhythms of Mia's healing process, to understand when she was working through surface issues and when she was touching deeper wounds. Emma, last week we talked about your feelings about permanence, about whether you believe your current family situation will last. How are you feeling about that today? Better. Dad keeps proving that he means what he says, so it's getting easier to believe him. What kinds of things does he do that prove he means what he says? Little things, mostly. Like he said he'd teach me to cook, and every Sunday, we make something new together. Like he said I could decorate my room however I wanted, and he didn't complain when I painted it purple with yellow stars. Like he said I never had to go back to foster care, and he kept that promise even when it got him in trouble with the police. How do you feel about the fact that he got in trouble with the police because of you? Scared sometimes. Because what if they find us and make him go to jail? But mostly proud, because he chose me over being safe, and nobody ever chose me over anything before. Ryan felt the familiar tightness in his chest whenever Mia's fundamental abandonment wounds surfaced in her therapy sessions. Her baseline assumption that she wasn't worth choosing, that love was conditional on convenience, that family was temporary. Those beliefs had been formed through years of institutional failure and would take years more to fully heal. Emma, what would you say to someone who told you that your dad made the wrong choice? That he should have followed the law instead of protecting you? I'd say they don't understand what it's like to be a kid nobody wants. I'd say they think rules are more important than people. I'd say they never had to choose between being legal and being loved. And what would you say to your dad if he told you he regretted the choice he made? I'd say I understand if he regrets it sometimes, because it cost him a lot. But I'd also say that I'm grateful every day that he thought I was worth the cost. An hour later, as they drove home through coastal redwoods that filtered afternoon sunlight into cathedral beams, Ryan reflected on the strange mathematics of love and sacrifice. He'd lost his company, his public reputation, and his legal standing in conventional society. He'd gained a daughter, a purpose, and the daily experience of unconditional love, both given and received. "Dad," Mia said as they pulled into their driveway. "Yeah, Dr. Peterson asked if I wanted to try going to regular school next year. Like actually sitting in classrooms with other kids." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd think about it. But I wanted to know what you think. I think you're smart enough and brave enough to handle regular school, if that's what you want. I also think homeschooling is working well for us if you want to keep doing that. What would you prefer?" "I'd prefer whatever makes you feel most confident and happy. But what would be easier for you?" Ryan pulled into their garage and turned off the engine, taking a moment to consider how to answer a question that revealed Mia's ongoing concern about being a burden on the person who'd sacrificed everything to protect her. "Mia, look at me." She turned to face him with the serious attention she gave all important conversations. "Taking care of you is not a burden. Teaching you is not a sacrifice. Spending my days focused on your education and healing is not something I'm doing because I have to. It's something I'm doing because I want to." Really? Really? For 3 years after Emma died, I had no idea what to do with my time that felt meaningful. Now I wake up every day knowing exactly what matters most. Helping you become the person you want to be. And if what I want to be is a normal kid who goes to regular school, then we'll figure out how to make that work. And if what you want to be is a brilliant homeschooled kid who learns at her own pace, we'll figure out how to make that work too. And if what I want to be is someone who doesn't have nightmares and doesn't worry about foster care and doesn't feel like she has to earn love by being perfect, then we'll keep doing the hard work of healing until you get there. That evening, as they prepared dinner together in the small kitchen that had become the heart of their domestic life, Ryan watched Mia measure ingredients with scientific precision and felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd finally figured out what success actually meant. "Dad, the onions are making me cry," Mia said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Want me to take over?" "No, I can handle it. I'm tougher than I look." "Yes, you are. I'm tough enough to go to regular school if I decide I want to." "Yes, you are. I'm tough enough to make friends and trust teachers and be around kids who had normal childhoods." "Yes, you are. I'm tough enough to be your daughter in public instead of just in private. You're already my daughter in every way that matters. The public part is just paperwork. Paperwork we can't actually do because we're technically criminals. Paperwork that doesn't determine the reality of our family." As they cooked together, sharing the comfortable intimacy of people who'd learned to find joy in ordinary moments. Ryan realized that he'd never answered the question he'd been asked repeatedly over the past 18 months. Whether he regretted choosing Mia over legal compliance, whether he missed his former life enough to wish he'd made different decisions. The answer was complicated, but ultimately simple. He missed some aspects of his previous existence. The intellectual challenge of building companies, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, the social connections that came with legitimate public identity. But he didn't miss the emotional emptiness that had consumed him after Emma's death, didn't miss the guilt and grief that had defined his existence for 3 years. Most importantly, he couldn't imagine a version of the past 18 months that would have been better than the reality they'd created together. Watching Mia heal, teaching her to trust, learning to love someone as she actually was rather than as he wanted her to be, all of it had been more meaningful than any corporate achievement. "Dad," Mia said as they sat down to eat the meal they'd prepared together. "Yeah, I've decided about school." "What did you decide?" "I want to try it. I want to see if I can be a normal kid, at least for a while." "What made you decide?" "I realized that running away from things that might hurt me isn't the same as choosing things that might help me. And I think I'm ready to choose some things that might help me grow. Even if they're scary? Especially if they're scary. You taught me that brave isn't the same as not afraid. Brave is being afraid and doing important things anyway." Ryan felt the familiar pride that came with watching his daughter choose courage over comfort, growth over safety, possibility over the known quantities that had once been her only reliable protection. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I'm proud of us," she replied. "I'm proud that we chose each other and made it work even when everyone said it was impossible." Later that night, after Mia had gone to bed with a book about a girl who attended a magical school where being different was considered an advantage, Ryan sat on their small porch listening to the Pacific Ocean and thinking about Emma. He'd spent 3 years believing that love ended with loss, that his capacity for fatherhood had died with his daughter, that the guilt of failing to protect Emma disqualified him from ever trying to protect anyone else. Meeting Mia had taught him that love multiplied rather than diminished, that learning to be a better father didn't dishonor Emma's memory, but honored it by proving that her death hadn't destroyed his ability to care for a child who needed him. Emma would have loved Mia, he realized. She would have admired her courage, been fascinated by her survival skills, and probably would have insisted on teaching her the pancake recipe that had been their special Sunday tradition. The two girls would have been friends, then sisters, partners in the kind of mischief that came from combining Emma's curiosity with Mia's street smarts. Emma Caldwell wasn't just an identity created for legal protection. It was a bridge between the daughter he'd lost and the daughter he'd found, a way of honoring both loves without diminishing either. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Peterson. "Emma's progress continues to be remarkable. You should be proud of the family you've built together." Ryan smiled in the darkness, understanding that pride was exactly what he felt. Not pride in breaking laws or evading systems, but pride in choosing love over convenience, commitment over comfort, family over everything else that had once seemed important. Tomorrow, Mia would begin the process of applying to attend public school as Emma Caldwell, the daughter of Ryan Caldwell, a freelance consultant who'd moved to Mendocino for the quiet lifestyle and excellent educational opportunities. Their carefully constructed new identity would face its most significant test as Mia learned to trust teachers, make friends, and navigate social situations with children who'd never experienced foster care, abandonment, or the necessity of survival living. But tonight, she was safe in her purple bedroom with yellow stars painted on the ceiling, sleeping peacefully because she knew that the man in the next room had chosen her over everything else and would choose her again tomorrow if necessary. And Ryan was sitting on the porch of a modest house, listening to ocean waves and feeling the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd finally learned the difference between success and happiness, between building an empire and building a family, between loving someone and learning to be loved in return. They were criminals by legal definition, outlaws who'd chosen family over bureaucracy, fugitives who'd found home in exile. But they were also father and daughter, teacher and student, protector and protected. Two people who'd rescued each other from different kinds of loneliness and built something beautiful from the wreckage of everything that had come before. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.